Normally, when a pack of overly excited anime girls corner you, it's a good thing. But when you're a legendary warrior trapped in a baby's body, you do the only logical thing. You launch yourself into the sky using a golden jetpack of pure diaper magic and crash land directly onto a high-tier noble's chest. Yes, this is our main character. He's currently a chubby infant who can barely hold his own head up, but his soul is a 30-year-old warrior who just got brutally murdered by his own family, and the guy he just face-planted on? That's the brother of the man who killed him. Talk about a bad lobby matchup. But to understand how this baby turned into a flying tactical nuke, we have to go back to the snowstorm where it all went terribly, terribly wrong. We open on a literal mountain of corpses. Standard Monday morning in a dark fantasy manhwa. This towering unit with the blonde hair is Duke Roderick Elmheim, and the bleeding guy standing behind him is his son, Ash. Ash just survived a suicidal military campaign, only to realize his dear old dad used him and his troops as literal meat shields. Roderick doesn't even deny it. He basically looks at him and says, "Yeah, I did it. What are you gonna do about it, you wingless trash?" See, in this world, the Elmheim family is the absolute peak of martial power, and they get that power from magical wing crests on their skin. More wings equals more magic. Roderick supposedly rescued Ash from a blizzard when he was a baby, and Ash spent his entire life working like a dog to repay that debt. But because Ash didn't inherit a single wing crest, his siblings treated him like a level 1 tutorial mob, forcing him to grind physical stats until his hands literally bled. He thought if he just worked hard enough, his father would finally look at him with something other than disgust. Turns out, the only thing waiting for him was an ambush set up by his own family. Roderick straight up tells him that tools don't get happy endings. At this point, Ash's brain finally clicks. He leaps into the air, screaming, "I trusted you! What a fool I was!" It's a great cinematic shot, but Roderick has a max-level build. He casually slashes Ash across the chest, and before Ash can even hit the ground, his trash stepbrothers bind him with magical red chains. They start laughing, telling him a wingless dog belongs in the dirt. Ash is coughing up blood, crying out, "Why did you even take me in?" Roderick kneels down, and this is where the story gets incredibly dark. He grabs Ash by the hair and says he never cared about him. He only wanted the legendary Seven Wings power dwelling inside Ash's body. He even mocks Ash's dead mother, calling her a useful incubator. And then, Roderick literally rips the magical crest right out of Ash's flesh, leaving him to bleed out in the freezing snow. His stepbrothers raise their swords for the execution, and Ash's vision goes completely dark. He dies, thinking his entire existence was a cruel joke. Honestly, Worst Dad of the Year award goes to Roderick. No competition. But then, something weird happens. Ash expects the cold embrace of death, but instead, he feels something warm. He opens his eyes and sees a woman's face. Then he looks down. He's lying in a massive snowbank, and when he tries to raise his hand, he sees a tiny, chubby baby fist. He checks his face, his legs. Yup, he's a literal infant. Before he can even process this cosmic reboot, he hears horses. Roderick's guards are hunting for the woman who smuggled the baby out. Ash realizes this woman died to save him, and that he has regressed back in time to the very night he was rescued. If he stays here, Roderick's guards will find him, and the nightmare loop will start all over again. So, our 30-year-old warrior baby does the only thing he can. He starts crawling through a literal blizzard. It's a brutal watch. His tiny lungs are burning, his limbs are freezing, but his golden eyes are burning with pure, unadulterated spite. He swears he will survive, and he will make Roderick pay. He drags himself across the snow, leaving a trail like a tiny, angry seal until he literally passes out from exhaustion. Luckily, a little girl with white hair spots him and calls out to her father. A man in highly expensive noble gear walks over and scoops him up. It's Viscount Hyfried Elmheim. Hyfried looks at the massive crawl mark in the snow and is absolutely flabbergasted. How did a newborn baby crawl 100 yards through a level 10 blizzard? He wraps the baby in his cloak, completely unaware of the absolute menace he just adopted. Ash wakes up in a warm, lavish room. He thinks he's safe, but then a chubby finger pokes him in the face. He is immediately surrounded by a squad of cute little girls. They start pulling his cheeks, squishing his nose, and treating him like a new toy. For a hardened warrior, this is a fate worse than death. He wriggles free and literally dives off the bed. The girls start chasing him, and Ash is crawling for his absolute life across the polished wooden floor. He panics. His gold eyes flash, and a massive pillar of golden, magical energy erupts from his body. He launches into the air, flying across the room before losing control and landing face first on Viscount Hyfried. Ash looks up, recognizes the man, and realizes he is in the estate of Roderick's older brother. In his past life, Hyfried was a legendary warrior, but his branch of the family was completely wiped out in a civil war. Ash realizes he is in the heart of the enemy's rival house, which is basically like jumping out of the frying pan and landing directly in another frying pan. He facepalms, thinking his luck is absolute garbage. But then, Hyfried's wife gently takes him into her arms. She smiles down at him with so much warmth and kisses his forehead, telling him he's safe now. Ash is completely stunned. He has never experienced actual motherly love before, and it almost makes him break character. But the wholesome moment is cut short. Hyfried notices something and gently lifts the baby's shirt. There, glowing proudly on Ash's arm, is a massive red and black crest. It's the 7 wings. Ash looks at his arm in absolute shock. He realizes that because he regressed, Roderick hasn't stolen his power yet. The legendary strength that was taken from him is fully intact. Hyfried's wife looks worried, asking what they should do with a child bearing such a dangerous mark. Ash tenses up, thinking Hyfried is going to sell him out to the main family. He clutches his tiny fists, preparing to fight, but Hyfried looks him dead in the eyes and says, "I'm adopting him." Ash's baby brain completely short-circuits. Hyfried reaches out and gently pats his head, saying this baby is just a fledgling who needs shelter until he's ready to fly on his own. It's a beautiful, emotional peek, until the daughters literally crash through the door because they were eavesdropping. They scramble to their feet, blushing, and ask what his name is. The mother smiles, looks at our golden-eyed warrior baby, holds him up to the moonlight, and declares his new name, Aster. We immediately jump 10 years into the future. A carriage pulls up to a grand estate. A young man steps out, and oh no, he's hot. Astor is now 10 years old, carrying himself with absolute elegance. He reaches back to help his pink-haired older sister, Alfin, out of the carriage. Alfin smiles, completely doting on her handsome little brother, while Astor remains perfectly calm. They have arrived at the Sword Dance Gathering. It's a massive annual social event where noble houses show off their young prodigies. But as soon as the Hyfried family walks in, the crowd starts whispering trash. They mock the Viscount house for adopting a boy of unknown origins, glaring at Astor with glowing red eyes of pure jealousy. Alfin clenches her fist, telling Astor not to let it get to him, explaining that weak people get crushed first in high society. Astor doesn't even blink. This guy has died once. A few mean words from some background characters aren't going to hurt his feelings. Hyfried turns to him, asking if he's disappointed by the cold reception. Astor looks up with a terrifyingly beautiful smirk and says, "No, father. This kind of cold reception suits me just fine." In his past life, he had the worst social debut imaginable, leaving him humiliated and broken. But now, he has his 7 wings back. He looks up at the balcony and spots his abusive stepbrothers from his past life, standing there looking like discount anime villains who spend too much money on hair gel. They have no idea that the wingless trash they murdered is back, he's overpowered, and he is about to turn this entire gathering into his personal bloodbath. Welcome back to the Ultimate Smurf Account Run. We open on a quick history lesson because the author wants to make sure you understand the rules of this server. Back in the day, being a knight wasn't just about holding a sharp piece of metal and looking cool. It was about power, prestige, and having enough visual flair to make everyone else feel poor. You had to prove your worth through cold, hard martial skill and back that up with a family name that could make entire rooms go quiet. But in this empire, you couldn't just buy your way to the top of the leaderboards. The ultimate status symbol, the thing that separated the actual players from the background NPCs, was the magical brand sitting on your skin. The wing crest. It's basically a genetic cheat code that determines how much mana you can pump through your body. Cut back to the present, and Astor is looking down at the arena, thinking this place is just as toxic as he remembers. His other adoptive sisters, Fren and Freya, were smart enough to stay home and dodge this entire social train wreck. But our guy has to be here. He spots the shadows of his past life bullies lurking in the background, already whispering. The main house kids love to pick on the branch family, treating anyone with fewer wings on their crests like a punching bag. Alpha notices Astor staring into space and calls his name, looking slightly stressed. She asks if he is getting nervous since this is his official debut on the high society stage. Astor just gives her a calm smile and says not really, adding that if anything, this whole place just feels nostalgic. Alfin is immediately suspicious because 10-year-olds do not usually use the word nostalgic unless they are secretly a regressed 30-year-old warrior. Before she can question him, Viscount Hyfried steps up, explaining he has to go attend a political conference for a bit. He tells Astor to keep an eye on his sister. Alphen immediately pouts, arguing that she is literally a year older than Astor and should be the one babysitting him. Highfried just chuckles, pats Astor on the shoulder, and tells him to use this event to make some useful connections. But then the mood shifts, and Highfried leans in close, his voice dropping to a whisper. He warns Astor to make sure absolutely no one catches even a glimpse of his seven wings crest. Astor watches his dad walk away, feeling the heavy, hostile stares of the crowd drilling into his back. He sighs internally, thinking that with an atmosphere this toxic, making peaceful connections is basically impossible. His eyes go sharp, locking onto a very specific target across the room. Alphen asks him where he is going now. Astor doesn't even look back as he tells her he is going to go make some new friends. We cut to a corner of the hall where a group of wealthy kids are laughing, loud and obnoxious. Sitting right in the center of the couch is a guy with reddish-orange hair, acting like he owns the entire building. He notices Astor approaching and asks who the hell he is. Astor walks right up to him with a perfectly polite, completely fake smile, saying it is nice to meet him. He introduces himself as Astor Elmheim, claiming the title of his younger brother. He says he saw them from across the room and decided to come over to say a friendly hello. The blonde kid sitting next to him laughs, identifying Astor as the adopted kid the branch house picked up from the streets. Astor looks at them, and his mind immediately flashes back to his past life. Darius and Grion, the two heirs who tortured and executed him. Back then, they felt like terrifying, godlike figures who held his life in their hands. But now, looking at them with a master's eyes, they just look like a bunch of children playing pretend. Before he can do anything, Alphen runs up and grabs his shoulder, her voice filled with panic. She tells Astor they need to leave immediately, reminding him that they already said their hellos. Darius grins, spotting her and calling her out with a smug sneer. He asks if she is finally done hiding behind her father, ordering her to come over and entertain them since the main house demands it. Alphen stops, her hand clenching her sword hilt as she firmly refuses, stating there is no master-servant relationship between their families. Astor tries to pull her away, telling her to let it go, but Darius isn't done talking. Our guy's face goes completely blank, as Darius starts digging a very deep grave for himself. Darius laughs, loudly telling the crowd how Highfried failed to protect the king and had his own arm cut off by his younger brother as punishment. He mockingly says he is glad he doesn't have the blood of a one-armed loser running through his veins. Alphen snaps, spinning around and screaming at him to take those words back. In response, Darius casually spits a mouthful of red wine right at her face. He sneers, telling her that her father must be incredibly disappointed that he only keeps producing useless daughters who can't even inherit the title. He looks down at her, holding up his glass, and mockingly suggests that next time she should wear rags so she won't mind getting wet. Alphen stands there, shivering, clutching her stained dress as tears start to well up in her eyes. Astor is standing behind her, and the temperature in the room basically drops to absolute zero. He remembers being worried on the way here. He was worried that seeing these guys again wouldn't make him feel any anger at all because they are just children to him now. But as he walks past his crying sister, he realizes he was wrong. And he is actually very glad. He casually grabs a full bottle of wine from a nearby tray and calls out to Darius. Darius looks up, completely caught off guard as the bottle flies through the air. Astor draws his practice sword in a split second, slicing the bottom off the bottle before Darius can even blink. The entire contents of the bottle splash directly over Darius's head, soaking his expensive clothes and ruining his perfect hair. Astor sheathes his sword, looking down at the shivering, soaked air of the main family with absolute coldness. He casually licks a drop of the liquid off his finger, tasting it. He smiles, mockingly noting that it is just grape juice, and suggests it is the perfect drink for little baby nobles who aren't ready for real conflict yet. We open on a flashback to 3 years ago, with the Viscount training ground engulfed in an absolute explosion of golden light. Highfried is shouting at Astor to control his power. His adoptive sisters are huddled together on the ground, terrified, as the violent waves of mana threaten to blow them away. This is the raw, unrefined power of the Seven Wings Crest. It is an ancient, godlike energy that doesn't care about the limits of a human body. Highfried stands in front of the girls, bracing his sword against the magical storm, wondering if a mere child can ever hope to control something this massive. Astor stands at the center of the storm, his eyes glowing white, asking himself if he and this legendary power can ever truly coexist. Back in the present, a servant slams the doors to the high society conference room open, yelling that something terrible has happened. Highfried looks up, annoyed that their meeting is being interrupted as the other high nobles stare at the messenger. The servant gasps for air, announcing that the sons of the Elmheim main house and the Branch family are currently fighting in the main lobby. The room goes completely still. Highfried's eyes go wide, while Duke Roderick, sitting in the background, just narrows his eyes in cold interest. Highfried doesn't waste a single second, turning around and sprinting out of the room. Alphen runs up to him in the hallway, looking incredibly anxious as her father asks her what happened. A loud, mocking voice laughs from behind, telling them to just look down at the arena over there. The entire hall is packed with hundreds of nobles crowding around the balcony to watch the entertainment. Highfried and Alphen look over the railing, spotting Astor standing in the center of the ring, facing down Darius. The boisterous noble behind them laughs, saying a duel between the descendants of the great Elmheim brothers is a rare spectacle. Other nobles whisper in the background, knowing that depending on how this fight ends, the political landscape of the empire could shift. The muscular noble grins, holding his chin, predicting that this sword dance gathering is about to get incredibly ugly. Down in the arena, Darius is losing his mind. He screams that some stray branch house mutt is trying to pick a fight with the supreme main family. He raises his sword high and a brilliant red light erupts from his hand. It's a four-wing crest, a high-tier noble brand that makes the crowd gasp in awe. Darius smiles like a classic cartoon villain, demanding that Astor show his own wing crest if he isn't too terrified. Astor just looks at him, completely deadpan, and says that showing off such a weak, basic pattern so proudly is honestly embarrassing. He adds that he could never bring himself to do something so cringe in public. Darius's face twists in pure, unadulterated rage, a vein popping on his forehead as he realizes he is being mocked by an adopted kid. Astor points his practice sword at him, stating that when he wins, Darius is going to apologize to Alphen. Darius counters, saying if he wins, Astor will become his dog. Darius screams that he is going to work him to the bone, launching himself forward with dual blades in a wild, aggressive rush. Astor stands his ground, watching the attack approach with the calm, analytical gaze of a veteran who has fought in 100 wars. Darius swings with all his might, but Astor casually parries the strike, steel meeting steel with a sharp ring. Astor slides backward smoothly, keeping his posture perfect, while Darius's ally in the balcony smirks, thinking the match is already decided. But Astor's hand holding the hilt is perfectly steady, his golden eyes observing his opponent's sloppy form. Darius yells that this is the absolute power of someone who carries a real noble crest, his body engulfed in a violent red magical aura. He unleashes a massive wind-splitting slash, but Astor easily defiles the laws of physics, dodging the strike by a hair's breadth. Alphen clutches the balcony railing, screaming Astor's name in pure panic. The muscular noble watching from above chuckles, noting that young Master Darius's actual swordsmanship is incredibly immature and sloppy. But he adds that in this world, no matter how bad your physical skills are, overwhelming magical power can easily bridge the gap. He explains the power scale of this world. If a standard one-wing crest holds the magical power of a single candle, then the raw, explosive magic of a four-wing crest is basically a massive dynamite explosion. Darius continues his relentless assault, mockingly asking where all of Astor's earlier confidence went. Astor just keeps blocking, his face expressionless. Darius jumps high into the air, coming down with a massive, fire-infused overhead strike, while the spectators assume the Branch House kid is finished. But Astor's eyes go incredibly sharp. He has seen this exact move 1,000 times in his past life. He raises his blade, catching the explosive strike with a single, perfectly timed block that stops Darius's momentum instantly. Darius's eyes go wide in pure shock, his jaw dropping as he realizes his massive magical attack was stopped by a kid with no visible aura. Astor looks up at him, his golden eyes glowing with a terrifying intensity as he quietly tells him he talks way too much. With a sudden, violent twist of his wrist, Astor deflects the blades, sending Darius flying backward through the air. Astor stands tall, a brilliant golden light finally beginning to swirl around his body as he unleashes his controlled mana. He thinks about how he spent the last 10 years with his adoptive family, quietly grinding, learning to master his magic, waiting for this exact moment of revenge. He leaps forward, his sword trailing a massive arc of golden light that splits the air. Darius raises his swords to block, but the sheer, crushing weight of Astor's physical strength and refined mana slams into him. The impact forces Darius to his knees, his legs buckling as the stone floor beneath him cracks from the pressure. Grion, watching from the balcony, gasps in absolute horror, unable to comprehend how his powerful brother is being completely dominated. Darius grinds his teeth, sweating profusely, screaming that he is a proud four-winged noble and cannot be defeated by a nobody. But Astor's golden light easily overpowers his red flame, shattering his defense with a blinding flash of energy. The crowd of nobles goes completely chaotic, whispering in disbelief that the heir of the main house is being completely handled. Astor steps closer, his gaze so intense and murderous that Darius suddenly begins to freeze up. Highfried stands on the balcony, his expression turning serious as he realizes Astor is dangerously close to letting his raw rage slip. Darius looks up, and for a split second, a wave of primal, instinctual terror washes over him. He sees a vision of a battle-hardened, terrifying warrior standing over him, the exact image of the brother they murdered in the snow. The memory of his past life cruelty flashes in his mind, and Darius's arrogant smirk completely vanishes, replaced by absolute dread. Astor's hidden Seven Wings energy threatens to spill out, his eyes glowing with a dark, terrifying golden flame. Darius screams in panic, entirely overwhelmed by the suffocating pressure of Astor's aura. Alphen screams for Astor to stop, realizing that if he continues, he might actually end Darius's life right here in front of everyone. Hearing his sister's voice, Astor snaps back to reality, redirecting his final strike with flawless control. The massive golden explosion splits the arena floor, sending a shockwave through the entire hall as the dust begins to settle. Darius's practice swords are shattered into pieces, and he falls backward onto his wet pants, shivering and hyperventilating in pure humiliation. Astor sheathes his sword, looking down at his pathetic cousin with absolute cold indifference. He tells Darius that next time he should wear some rags so he won't mind getting wet, perfectly throwing his own insult back in his face. He looks up at the balcony, seeing Alphen smiling down at him, her eyes bright with relief and pride. Astor smiles back, thinking that he is no longer the weak, helpless, wingless boy of his past life, and just knowing that is enough to clear his mind. But before he can even take a step, his body suddenly goes completely rigid, his eyes widening in pure instinctual alarm. A massive, suffocating pressure falls over the entire arena, the atmosphere turning blood red as a terrifying aura crushes the room. Astor turns his head slowly, his sweat dropping as he looks toward the grand staircase. Standing at the top of the stairs, surrounded by a swirling storm of dark crimson mana, is a massive, legendary figure. The ultimate boss has arrived. Duke Roderick. Astor stares up at his murderous biological father, his golden eyes narrowing as the real battle begins. So, the duel is over. The third son of the main family is crying on the floor, and the crowd is in absolute shambles. But our guy doesn't even have time to celebrate his win, because the final boss of his past life just entered the chat. Duke Roderick steps down the stairs, and the temperature in the room drops straight to absolute zero. He looks down at his defeated son with the kind of look your dad gives you when you bring home a bad grade. Astor stands his ground, but every survival instinct in his body is screaming. Darius scrambles backward through the dust, desperately trying to save face. He grabs his father's cape, begging him to use his godlike power to put this branch house trash in his place. Roderick doesn't even look down as he raises his heavy boot and stamps it directly onto his own son's hand. The impact literally crushes the stone floor beneath Darius's fingers. The entire crowd gasps in horror at the sudden, casual brutality of the main house leader. Roderick coldly declares that a useless child who cannot even avenge his own defeat has no right to hold a sword. Highfried yells at him to stop, but Roderick is already drawing his blade to deliver a permanent lesson. The air splits as the massive weapon is raised. But before the blade can fall on Darius, a tiny shadow steps directly into the path of the Duke. Astor stands right in front of the massive sword, his golden eyes completely unfazed by the killer aura. He quietly points out that his cousin still hasn't delivered the apology he owes to Alphen. He asks his uncle if they could please postpone the family execution until after the manners are sorted out. Roderick sneers, mockingly asking if an adopted street orphan actually thinks he belongs to the legendary Elmheim family. Astor fires back that even without blood ties, his father Highfried taught him everything about a knight's pride. Roderick looks past him, his cold gaze shifting up toward the balcony where Highfried is standing. He explains that Astor's little stunt has severely damaged the pride of the 12,000 elite knights under their banner. The nearby nobles start sweating, realizing this is no longer a simple children's squabble. Roderick reminds everyone that Highfried had to pay for his past disloyalty with his own arm. He asks Astor what he is prepared to offer up to pay for today's insult. Astor just smiles. his voice dropping to a calm, icy whisper. He says that since this was a legitimate duel, he was simply answering insults with his sword. He looks Roderick dead in the eyes, throwing his own words back in his face. He quotes his uncle, declaring that he has absolutely no intention of giving up even a single finger. Alphen is hyperventilating on the balcony, clutching her chest in absolute terror. The other main house heirs are laughing, thinking this 10-year-old kid has a massive death wish. Roderick's eyes flare with red, murderous intent. He draws his sword in a blinding flash of crimson mana. He steps forward, ready to cut the boy down. Asura prepares to dodge, but the speed of the strike is past human limits. Suddenly, a massive shockwave tears through the center of the arena. Alphen covers her face, crying out as dust and stone debris explode into the air. Hyfried's voice roars through the hall, his anger shaking the very foundations of the building. He drops down from the high balcony like a literal meteor, his cape flying behind him. Steel meets steel, and the violent shockwave travels all the way up the walls. Hyfried completely blocks the fatal blow, sliding into a defensive stance in front of his son. He desperately turns to check if Asura is still in one piece. Behind them, a massive solid stone pillar is cleanly sliced in half from just the residual wind of the clash. Hyfried looks back at Roderick, his face pale as he realizes how close he came to losing his son. But Asura is still standing, his practiced sword held in a perfect stance despite the blood running down his forehead. He stares at Roderick with a dark, silent rage that could melt iron. Roderick just sheathes his sword with a disappointed click, looking completely bored. He turns his back on them, walking away as Darius scrambles to follow him like a beaten dog. The heavy pressure finally leaves the room, and Asura's knees immediately give out as the exhaustion hits him. Hyfried catches him before he hits the cold stone floor, his hands shaking. Asura looks up at his father, whispering that he successfully protected their promise and their family's pride. Hyfried hugs him tight, his eyes soft as he tells him he did absolutely magnificent. Up on the balcony, the watching lords are trying to process the absolute insanity they just witnessed. One of them comments that Roderick's sudden attack was incredibly childish and petty for a man of his status, but another notes it was a necessary compromise to save the main house from complete social ruin. He points out that this kid just stood up to the most feared warrior in the Empire, made bold declarations, and walked away alive. As far as social debuts go, our guy didn't just win, he basically broke the entire high society metagame. The nobles look down at the cracked arena, whispering that the looming age of upheaval is coming much faster than they think. And in the center of the dust, Alphen and Hyfried hold on to Asura as the young star of the branch house finally closes his eyes. We open on a clear blue sky, the sounds of heavy training wooden swords echoing through the branch family courtyard. A knight gets sent flying across the dirt, his weapon spinning out of his hands. The defeated knight groans on the ground, calling Asura's skills absolutely magnificent. The watching guards whisper in awe, amazed that a 10-year-old kid is training this hard after already winning the biggest high society tournament of the year. They laugh, saying that since the main house has treated them like garbage for decades, watching Asura beat Darius was like a breath of fresh air. Asura stands in the center of the field, his wooden sword resting on his shoulder as he analyzes his current build. He knows his flashy victory at the gathering successfully shut up the haters who called the branch family a disgrace. But his real targets aren't the low-level bullies of the main house. He thinks back to Roderick's terrifying crimson aura and realizes that in his current 10-year-old body, he still stands zero chance against the Duke. He knows that having a legendary wing crest is just a visual indicator of raw potential, but potential is completely useless if you can't control it. He still can't draw out even a fraction of his hidden Seven Wings power without risking another massive, destructive explosion. He swings his wooden sword with a sharp snap, wishing he had a safe way to test his maximum output without destroying the entire province. His golden eyes glow with a quiet, lethal frustration. He looks around at the dozen groaning knights lying in the dirt and asks if anyone else is brave enough to step up. Alphen's voice calls out, teasing him for having absolutely no concept of the word restraint. Asura turns, dropping his sword as she explains that their father is calling for him in his private study. Asura blinks, his eyes dropping to her outfit. He points out that she is actually wearing heavy training gear, which is weird because she usually refuses to wear it since it isn't cute. Alphen crosses her arms, sighing that watching him fight made her realize she can't afford to stay weak either. She points her wooden training sword directly at his face, declaring that once he is done with father, he is going to keep her company in the arena. Asura just laughs, a genuine warm smile breaking across his face for the first time all day. He jokingly raises his hands, asking his older sister to please go easy on him. A few minutes later, Astor knocks softly on the heavy wooden doors of Highfried's office. He steps inside, finding his adoptive father sitting behind a massive desk covered in paperwork. Highfried looks up, his green eyes soft as he gesturing for his son to take a seat. He notes that it has officially been 10 years since they first brought baby Astor in from the freezing blizzard. Highfried explains that he originally planned to wait until Astor was much older, but recent events have forced his hand. He reaches into his desk and pulls out a beautiful, glowing red gemstone ring sitting on a blue velvet pillow. Highfried states with absolute seriousness that this ring is the official proof of the next head of the house. He looks his son dead in the eyes, declaring that he wants Astor to inherit the Viscount Elmheim family. Astor sits in silence, completely stunned by the sudden promotion. Highfried explains that while the Branch family is currently in a very delicate political position, they still have a massive territory and citizens to protect. He says they cannot afford to leave the position of successor vacant any longer with the main house actively looking for weakness. Astor looks down, asking if his older sisters are actually going to be okay with an adopted boy taking the title. Highfried sighs, explaining that his sisters who are currently away at elite night school will be returning in 3 days. He plans to break the news to the entire family then, specifically mentioning his older sisters Marfa and Kudo. Astor sweat drops, his inner monologue immediately crying because he knows Sister Kudo is going to be absolutely furious. He remembers that Kudo basically dislikes him purely because he happened to be born male and blessed with supreme magical talent. He stands up, politely but firmly declining the offer. He argues that he is still an immature child who can't even control his own volatile magic, reminding his father of the accident 3 years ago. He says someone with his unstable track record has zero confidence in convincing an angry older sister. Highfried just smiles, a knowing, amused expression on his face as he looks at the boy's unusually mature reasoning. He chuckles, admitting that he has often wondered if Astor is secretly an ancient warrior in disguise. He reaches down and pulls out a massive, ornate wooden chest, placing it heavily onto the table. He says that since the political ring clearly isn't Astor's style, he brought something he knew his son would actually want. Highfried opens the lid, revealing Graham, the legendary magic-devouring sword, an ancient weapon specifically designed to absorb and stabilize the volatile power of the Seven Wings. We open on a secluded clearing deep in the forest, the sun filtering through the dense green canopy. Astor is walking behind his father, wondering why they had to hike all the way out here just to test drive a new weapon. Highfried sweating as he recalls a flashback of Astor accidentally turning their training hall into a demolition zone. He notes it is a necessary precaution. He stops, presenting the heavy wooden box, and explains that the magic sword Grom is a legendary hilt passed down through generations. He opens the lid and lifts the weapon out, the metallic clasp opening with a sharp click. Astor looks at the hilt, his golden eyes widening in pure confusion as he notices something critical is missing. Highfried explains that the sword has no physical metal blade, channeling his own magic into the grip to demonstrate. Suddenly, a massive, swirling crimson blade of pure energy materializes from the crossguard, hums with volatile power. He swings it once, and the sheer air pressure from the magic slash carves a massive path through the distant trees. He turns back to Astor, his face serious as he warns that a user with weak mana control will get drained dry by this cursed hilt. He extends the grip, asking Astor if he is brave enough to give it a try. Our guy takes the hilt, his small hand locking around the leather-wrapped grip. He closes his eyes, preparing to channel his golden mana into the ancient artifact. But the second his power touches the metal, Graham starts pulling his magic out like an industrial vacuum, completely out of control. A massive, blinding pillar of golden white light shoots straight up into the sky, piercing the clouds. Back at the estate, the guards look up at the sky, absolutely terrified as they try to calculate what just happened. Alphen stands on the balcony, watching the massive energy beam fade into the atmosphere. She sighs, sweat dropping as she realizes that only one person in this province can cause that kind of structural damage. Down in the forest, Astor is sitting on his butt, panting heavily as he holds the smoking hilt. He admits the sword has some serious kick. Highfried is staring up at the giant swirling cloud vortex created by the blast, looking completely speechless. He notes that not a single person in the entire history of the Elmheim family has ever possessed a Seven Wings crest. He explains that if Astor can actually master this power, he will eventually surpass both himself and Duke Roderick. Astor stares at his hand, the thought of surpassing his past life executioner sending a chill down his spine. But Hyfried's face goes dark as he warns that holding this level of power always breeds conflict. He explains that if the main house or the royal court discovers the existence of his seven wings crest, things will get incredibly ugly. Some will try to use him as a political tool, while others will scheme to eliminate him as a threat to the balance of power. He extends his hand to his son, telling him he must grow stronger immediately to protect his own freedom. He looks down at Asura with a soft, protective gaze, acting like a true father who cares about his child's future. Asura grasps his hand, pulling himself up, his golden eyes burning with a silent, iron-clad determination. He vows to master the seven wings, promising himself he won't live a miserable, powerless life this time around. We cut to 3 days later at the front gates of the Grand Viscount estate, the family gathering to welcome some guests. The carriage doors open, and two girls step out. It's Marfa and Kudryavka, finally back from the elite night academy. Kudryavka, also known as Kudo, jumps out with a loud grin, throwing her arms wide to demand a massive welcome home hug. But the younger sisters immediately dodge her, running past to hug the gentle, silver-haired Marfa instead. They complain that Kudo always hugs too hard and completely ruins their hair. Kudo pouts, crossing her arms and claiming she has perfectly mastered knightly etiquette at school and would never be so clumsy. She spots Alfin standing nearby and immediately lunges forward, pulling her into a massive, suffocating bear hug anyway. Alfin struggles to breathe, complaining as Kudo rubs her head like a giant, overactive golden retriever. Marfa looks around the grand entrance hall, her green eyes scanning the crowd before asking where Asura is hiding. The parents look away, a nervous sweat dropping down Hyfried's neck as he realizes the dangerous sibling reunion is about to begin. Kudo's green eyes narrow, her smile turning incredibly sharp and competitive as she hears the boy's name. Cut back to the forest clearing, and another massive red magical explosion tears through the grass. Asura is leaning on his knees, panting heavily as he tries to force Graham's energy to form a stable blade. He mutters that creating the blade is easy, but keeping it stable is eating through his stamina like crazy. A voice calls out from the trees, mockingly teasing him for going all out in the dirt when he should be at the gates. Asura blinks, turning to see Kudo walking into the clearing with her hand resting on her broadsword. She smirks, accusing him of being incredibly cold for not even showing up to greet his amazing older sister. She notes that the entire Night Academy was buzzing with rumors about how an adopted kid beat down Duke Roderick's third son. Asura sweat drops, trying to play it cool by praising her for winning the Academy's prestigious honor medal this year. The bright gold medal glints on her red jacket as she proudly stands with her hands on her hips. She notes that if she couldn't at least manage that much, she wouldn't be worthy of inheriting her father's title. But her expression immediately turns incredibly cold as she asks why he turned down the successor talk. Asura explains that he just doesn't think he is qualified for the position yet, but Kudo isn't buying his humble act. She unsheathes her heavy blade, muttering that both he and their father are being incredibly cruel by treating her dreams like a joke. Asura's survival instincts spike, his golden eyes widening as he senses a sudden surge of cold, dense mana. Without a single warning, Kudo swings her sword, a massive blue crescent of magic cutting a giant tree in half behind him. Asura barely dodges, leaping backward through the falling leaves, demanding to know why she is suddenly attacking him. Kudo just grins, resting her heavy broadsword on her shoulder, declaring she is going to test her little brother's actual limits. Asura protests, arguing that his magic sword is still highly incomplete and unstable. Kudo's face goes completely serious as she asks if he thinks a real enemy on a bloody battlefield will wait for his sword to be ready. She charges forward like a freight train, warning him that if he dares to hold back, she will literally crush him into the dirt. She leaps high into the air, coming down with a massive blue-lit overhead strike that splits the ground. Asura grinds his teeth, realizing he has absolutely no choice but to activate Graham's unstable energy to block the attack. The massive red and blue magical blades clash, sending a shockwave of wind through the forest as Kudo's wild, manic smile fills his vision. The impact shakes the clearing, the sheer force of the sibling rivalry threatening to blow the surrounding forest away. The clash explodes, a massive double pillar of blue and red magic shooting up through the forest canopy. Kudo is laughing, sliding back through the dirt before launching herself forward with a flurry of lightning-fast slashes. She mocks his unstable weapon, asking what kind of pathetic imitation of a sword he is holding as she parries his block. Asura barely manages to keep up, his arms shaking from the brute force of her strikes, as he calls her out for having zero mercy. He recalls that his sister has been this aggressively competitive since they were toddlers. Because he is the only male child and carries a higher tier crest, the rules of their society automatically favored him for inheritance. She viewed this system as completely unfair, constantly challenging him to spars and running him ragged around the estate. She steps forward, her green eyes glowing with absolute determination as she prepares her next strike. She swings with a massive, wind-splitting roar, screaming that someone who runs away from their responsibility isn't fit to lead. Back at the estate, Marfa is looking out the window, watching the distant forest explosions with a worried sigh. She asks Highfried if they should really be letting those two fight, noting that someone might actually die out there. Highfried sits calmly at his desk, chuckling that they are just healthy rivals who need to blow off some academic steam. Marfa looks back at the window, sweating as another massive boom rattles the glass panes of the office. She walks over to his desk, asking what the real reason is for summoning them back from the Night Academy. Highfried's smile fades, his hand reaching into his drawer and pulling out a heavy, formally sealed envelope. Marfa looks at the seal, her expression immediately turning pale as she reads the crest stamped on the wax. It is a formal summons from the main Elmheim house, the corrupt elders demanding to inspect Astor after his performance at the gathering. She bites her lip, realizing the dangerous political trap Roderick is setting for their branch family. Highfried's green eyes look incredibly grim as he whispers that if they make a single wrong move, they might lose Astor forever. Cut back to the forest, and the rapid-fire clashing of swords is tearing the clearing to pieces. Astor blocks another heavy strike, yelling that he literally turned down the successor position to avoid this exact drama. Kudo's face twists in anger, screaming that his half-hearted, casual attitude toward his God-gifted talent is exactly what she hates about him. She comes down with a brutal overhead smash, the sheer weight of her magic pressing Astor's blade down to the dirt. Astor's arms are screaming from the pressure, thinking she feels less like a sister and more like a high-level raid boss swinging a sledgehammer. He twists his wrist, letting her blade slide off his crossguard as he attempts to create some distance. He slides back smoothly, trying to rely on his decades of master-level physical swordsmanship to dodge her aggressive reach. Kudo pursues him relentlessly, laughing that he is just running away to his specialty because he is too afraid to contest her strength directly. She unleashes a massive, lightning-infused blue blast that completely vaporizes the dirt where he was standing. Astor is sent flying, blocking the residual shockwave with his arms as he coughs up a bit of dust. Kudo points her sword down, declaring that someone who only swings a physical sword is merely a third-rate knight. She stands tall, her boots clicking on the cracked stone floor of the destroyed clearing. She says that handling basic magic makes you second-rate, but mastering both sword and magic is what makes a true elite. She looks at him, her expression turning into one of deep, genuine disappointment. She explains the power system. A single wing difference on a crest represents a massive threefold gap in raw mana capacity. She points out that as a 5-wing, she is technically 2 entire levels inferior to his legendary 7-wings crest. Yet despite his massive genetic advantage, he is currently losing because he is refusing to use his real power. She leans in close, asking if he is still deeply traumatized by the magical explosion he caused 3 years ago. Astor's eyes go wide, the word afraid echoing in his mind like a physical slap in the face. He looks down at Graham, suddenly realizing that his struggle to stabilize the blade was because he was unconsciously trying to suppress his own mana. Kudo's body begins to crackle with an insane amount of blue lightning, her voice dropping to a dark, intense whisper. She says that if he is going to let his God-gifted power rot out of fear and arrogance, he should just hand everything over to her. She charges forward with her ultimate full-power strike, the lightning trailing behind her like a comet. Astor stands his ground, a calm, chilling smile returning to his face as he thanks his sister for finally waking him up. Instead of running, he charges directly at her, completely turning off Graham's unstable energy blade. Kudo is shocked, thinking the kid has completely run out of mana and is suicidally rushing her attack. But Astor's hand is holding the hilt with absolute, unwavering confidence, his eyes glowing with a brilliant golden light. He decides to stop trying to maintain a continuous blade, planning to channel his massive 7-wings reserves at the exact millisecond of impact. Kudo swings her sword, a manic grin on her face as she prepares to finish the duel. Astor's body begins to radiate a dense, crimson and black aura, his 7-wings crest blazing through his shirt. He thinks about his second life, this warm family and his sword, promising himself he will never let anyone take them away. Kudo blinks, catching a single word of his quiet whisper, her green eyes widening in pure confusion. Before her blade can touch him, Astor vanishes from her field of vision like a literal ghost. She swings at empty air, her massive lightning strike hitting the dirt and causing a massive explosion. She gasps, realizing he completely bypassed her guard as a massive wave of heat suddenly washes over her neck from behind. Astor stands right behind her, his sword glowing with the blinding, completed crimson fire of the 7 wings as he prepares to strike. We open inside a quiet bedroom, the bright morning sun cutting through the heavy curtains. Kudo slowly opens her eyes, staring at the unfamiliar ceiling of her room. She groans, trying to piece together her fragmented memory as a shadow leans over her bed. It is her older sister Marfa, calmly welcoming her back to the land of the living. Kudo immediately sits up, her heart rate spiking as she panics about the outcome of her match against Astor. Marfa giggles, explaining that Astor carried her all the way back to her room, claiming she simply fell asleep from travel fatigue. Kudo's face goes blank as she realizes what actually happened. She looks at the magic-devouring hilt sitting on her nightstand, recalling the exact millisecond she thought she was going to die. She remembers the terrifying heat of Astor's golden mana and realizes he intentionally dispelled his blade right before impact. He didn't just win the duel, he spared her life while making it look like a harmless accident to protect her pride. She clenches her blankets, smiling as she mutters about her thoroughly disagreeable little brother. Suddenly, she throws the covers off, grabs her heavy sword, and screams that she wants a rematch immediately. But Marfa stops her, quietly noting that Astor has already departed. Kudo stops dead in her tracks, her green eyes wide with confusion. Marfa explains that a high-tier formal summons from the main house Shadow Elders arrived while she was unconscious. Kudo's scream of disbelief practically rattles the window panes of the entire mansion. We cut to a carriage speeding down a cobbled mountain road, the horses kicking up dust. Astor is looking out the window, his expression completely calm despite the literal death trap ahead. Hyfried sits across from him, explaining that the Shadow Elders they are about to meet are retired monsters who control the family from the background. These are the old rulers of the Shadow, men who hold immense political power even after stepping down from active duty. He notes that these elders have ignored Astor for 10 years, making their sudden, quiet summons incredibly suspicious. Astor notes it is because of the mess he made of Darius at the Sword Dance Festival. Hyfried warns that the old men of Elmheim value their prestige and family reputation more than money or human lives. He explains that anyone who dares to tarnish that reputation is quietly removed from the family tree. He paints a grim picture of rule breakers being thrown into cages and fed to wild beasts to keep the bloodline clean. He looks at Astor, expecting the 10-year-old to be shaking in his boots. Instead, Astor just smiles, casually waving his hand and saying he is prepared for execution or banishment. Hyfried is completely taken aback, asking his son if he is genuinely okay with traveling without any guard escort. Astor says it is fine, noting that leaving the estate actually helps his family stay safe. He jokes that with him gone, his sister Kudo can finally relax and stretch her wings without wanting to kill him. He looks down at Graham resting on his lap, noting that Kudo's aggressive fighting style actually helped him master the hilt's instant burst mechanic. But then his voice goes completely quiet, telling his father that if anything happens to him inside, Hyfried should not save him. Hyfried's face twists in pure anger, snapping at him for acting like a self-sacrificing martyr when he is just a child. Suddenly, a massive impact shakes the top of the moving carriage. The carriage window slides down, and a very familiar red-haired head pops into the cabin upside down. Kudo swings herself through the moving door, completely out of breath, complaining about them running away without saying goodbye. She steps into the cabin, pointing out that not even she or Marfa have ever received a summons from the Grand Shadow Elders. Hyfried sighs, telling her he ordered her to look after the territory while he was away. Kudo's playful attitude vanishes, her green eyes turning serious as she notes that this summons is clearly a massive crisis. She explains that Marfa was terrified Astor might not return from this meeting alive. Astor tries to laugh it off as an exaggeration, but Kudo cuts him off. She points her finger right at his nose, declaring with absolute seriousness that she hates him very much. She lists her complaints. He is a boy, he has a god-tier crest, he is treated specially, and he constantly acts like an adult despite being her little brother. But as the carriage speeds toward the dark castle, her voice softens. She crosses her arms, muttering that no matter how strong or weird he is still her little brother. She smiles, telling him to make sure he returns safely so they can have a proper rematch without any holding back. With a sudden leap, she dives out of the moving carriage, landing perfectly on her feet. Asura watches her wave from the road, thinking his hyper-competitive sister is actually a pretty great rival. His golden eyes glow with a quiet warmth as he whispers a thank you to Kudo. He promises himself that no matter what kind of monsters are waiting in that castle, he will definitely return home to his family. We open on the massive, spiked iron gates of the Elmheim main house, the sky above turning a dark, stormy gray. Hyfried and Astor walk through the courtyard, flanked by rows of heavily armored guards standing with long spears. Hyfried tells the lead guard they don't need a guide since he knows his own childhood home. The guard raises his spear, coldly stating they have strict orders to bring both of them directly to the Grand Elder. Astor looks up at the towering spires of the castle, thinking how nostalgic it is to return to this literal hellhole. Hyfried leans in, whispering a final warning to his son as they walk past training knights. He orders Astor to keep his head cool and stay completely silent, no matter what insults the elders throw at them today. Astor nods, his gaze scanning the courtyard as they approach the grand double doors. He notices Darius is nowhere to be seen, likely hiding in shame after getting his hand crushed. He looks at his father, putting on a perfectly fake, innocent child's smile. He promises to be as silent as a clam, remembering Kudo's warning to return home safely. The massive doors of the audience hall are thrown open, and their arrival is announced to the silent room. They walk down the long crimson carpet toward a towering throne sitting in the shadows. Hyfried immediately drops to one knee, bowing deeply as he greets the shadow rulers of Elmheim. Astor looks up, his golden eyes locking onto the ancient monster sitting on the throne, Zenith A. Elmheim, the sixth head of the house. He notices several high-ranking generals and familiar noble faces from the festival sitting on the side benches, watching like vultures. He notes that Duke Roderick is conspicuously missing from the room. Zenith sneers from his throne, stating that Roderick is far too busy with royal duties to deal with vulgar matters. He explains that Roderick is the sword of the royalty, leading the elite knights in active service. Because of that, the retired Shadow Elders have stepped in to handle the administrative cleanup of the Branch family's mess. Astor notes that for a retired old man, Zenith still throws a massive amount of weight around. Zenith laughs, mockingly referring to Astor as a stray pet dog who made a complete mess at the festival. He declares that adopting a child of unknown origin was a massive mistake, and since Astor bared his fangs at the main house, they have no choice but to banish him from the Empire, adding that Hyfried will also face severe punishment. Astor immediately snaps, stepping forward and shouting that his father had absolutely nothing to do with the fight. Hyfried closes his eyes, his shoulders trembling as his son breaks the silence rule in the first 5 minutes. Zenith's face goes dark, noting the boy lacks basic discipline for interrupting the adults. He stands up, gesturing to the shadow of the 12,000 knights serving under their banner. He explains that the Elmheim name is not a monolith, with dozens of factions constantly aiming for the top seat. He demands peace of mind, stating they need physical proof that Astor won't bring future harm to their reputation. He raises a glowing blue magic spear, the tip pointing directly at Hyfried's chest. He reminds Hyfried of the day Roderick cut off his arm as punishment for disloyalty. He commands Hyfried to take the spear and cut off Astor's head right here to close the matter. Hyfried stands up, his voice completely calm as he flatly refuses the command. He declares that if he must cut down his own child, he would gladly take his own life instead. Zenith's expression turns into one of pure sociopathic disgust. He slams his wooden cane onto the carpet with a sharp, heavy thud. He coldly declares that if they wish to die, they should all die, ordering the execution of Hyfried, his wife, and his daughters. The elite guards instantly draw their swords, surrounding Hyfried and Astor with cold steel. But inside the circle of blades, Astor's head drops, a quiet, chilling laugh escaping his lips. He asks the Grand Elder why a bunch of retired soldiers are huddling together and trembling in fear of a kid. He reaches for his collar, his hand tightening around the fabric as his golden eyes flare with power. He apologizes to his father, admitting he is simply too bad at staying silent when people threaten his family. With a sudden rip, he tears off his shirt, exposing his bear back to the entire room. A massive explosion of crimson and black mana floods the chamber as the legendary god-tier 7-Wings crest blazes on his skin. He looks back at the terrified elders, warning them that if they dare to lay a single finger on his family, these 7 Wings will become Elmheim's greatest nightmare. So, Astor has just ripped his shirt open, and the entire room of dusty old elders is currently having a collective brain aneurysm. They are looking at a 10-year-old child like he just explained the entire timeline of a complex sci-fi franchise to them in ancient Greek. Zenith is staring so hard, his remaining good eye is probably about to pop right out of his skull. The guards still have their steel pointed directly at Astor's bare chest, but their hands are shaking. Zenith asks if the kid even understands the weight of what he is showing them. Astor literally smiles. He basically says, "Yeah, the more wings you have, the harder you old guys sweat." And right on cue, Count Maze starts clapping like he is at a theater. Maze is laughing his head off while the other nobles look like they are about to throw up from sheer anxiety. He politely tells them to ignore him and carry on. Zenith decides it is time to drop some massive lore on us. He explains that the wing crest is not just a tattoo, it is an ancient magical organ given to humans by spirits. By passing this power down through generations, humans essentially upgraded their magical engines like they were min-maxing an RPG build. But in all of human history, not a single person has ever managed to reach 7 wings. The only ones who ever had it were the ancient winged spirit clan. So Astor asks him straight up if he thinks he is part of that spirit clan. Zenith looks at him and says, "Maybe." Highfried is standing there with a sword at his neck, looking at his adoptive son like, "Where did you even find this level of confidence?" Astor does not care about his birth secrets. He takes a step forward, completely ignoring the sharp steel pressed against his neck. He says his birth does not matter. What matters is whether this room actually has the balls to make an enemy out of him. He explains the basic rules of supply and demand. If they kick him out of Elmheim, every single rival noble family will throw a massive party to welcome a 7 Wings user. If that happens, the very rebellion these elders are terrified of will walk right to their front door. He is a walking tactical weapon. The nobles are starting to sweat. They are realizing this 10-year-old just completely checkmated their entire political structure in about 3 sentences. Astor's inner thoughts are even colder. He already knows a massive civil war is coming because he literally saw it play out in his past life. To keep the Viscount house safe, he needs to map out the players. He is using himself as bait to see who is an enemy and who is an ally. Zenith laughs his classic villain laugh. He says there is no actual proof those 7 wings are even real. Astor leans in with the most menacing smile possible and says, "If you think it is fake, then kill me right now. Otherwise, the moment I walk out of here, it is war." He's testing their resolve to see if they will take the bait. The tension is about to snap when Count Maze stands up. He says the conversation is going in circles. He suggests a much simpler solution. Why not just give the kid a trial and see what he can actually do? The fat noble next to him is shocked. He probably thought they were going to have a nice, peaceful execution today. Maze looks at Zenith with this incredibly suspicious smile. He says, "Everyone wants to see if the 7 Wings are the real deal anyway." He turns to the crowd and says, "This is the Grand Elmheim estate. Surely we have a dungeon test lying around." Astor looks at Maze and realizes what is happening. There is no doubt. Count Maze is playing along to save his life. This man is an ally. Zenith accepts the terms. He walks down the stairs and tells Astor to follow him. He says teaching a lesson to a disrespectful grandson is a grandfather's duty. That is a very toxic family dynamic. They head down into the dark, damp depths of the castle. It is an underground bunker connected directly to the city waterways, the perfect place to hide things you do not want the inspectors to see. Zenith says it was built as an emergency shelter, but they keep a single magic beast down here. The trial is simple. Kill it. Highfried walks up behind Astor, looking incredibly stressed. He whispers that Darius was sent down here and did nothing but cry. He asks why Astor did not just keep his power hidden, like they planned. Astor smiles and says he cannot hide this forever anyway. Highfried sighs, hands him his magic hilt gram, and tells him to at least not let his guard down. Astor says his goodbyes and steps onto the suspension bridge. Maze watches him go with a very unreadable expression. Astor walks into the pitch-black dungeon. The air is cold and smells like iron. But our guy has spent a lifetime fighting in dark trenches. His golden eyes adjust to the darkness instantly. He looks up at the ceiling hatch where the nobles are watching him like a gladiator match. He remembers Zenith's words about Darius crying until the very end. He looks at the bloodstains on the floor. Then, a massive shadow moves in the darkness. A giant blue lion-like creature emerges, roaring so loud the stone walls shake. Astor draws the magic hilt gram. Time to see if the main house's pet is as tough as it looks. So the rumors were true. The Elmheim main family really does keep a biological hazard in their basement. The beast roars, exposing rows of massive, blood-dripping fangs. Astor grips his hilt. For a split second, he actually feels bad for Darius. Imagine being born a regular human in this family of absolute psychos and being thrown to this thing. The beast lunges. Astor dodges instantly, moving so fast he leaves afterimages. He honestly thinks his sister Kudo is way scarier than this lion. He lands a clean strike and slices through the beast. But as he turns around, something bizarre happens. Weird, glowing purple tentacles and eyes start bursting out of the beast's neck. It is regenerating the cut instantly. Highfried watches from the observation grate and recognizes the purple rot. He screams, "Why is there an undead under the mansion?" Zenith smiles. He explains that these things are drawn to the smell of death, so it wandered into their disposal area. It would not die no matter how much they cut or burned it, so they kept it as a convenient trash can for executing people. The fat noble is sweating again. He says even elite knights struggle to capture an undead. He asks Zenith if he is just trying to murder the boy. Zenith laughs. He says if the kid dies, it just means he was all talk, and even if he dies, they can still harvest his body. Maze is watching through the bars, looking unusually serious. He wants to see if Astor's big talk was backed up by actual power. Meanwhile, down in the arena, the undead lion is launching a relentless barrage of claw strikes. Astor parries and slashes, but every wound closes up in a millisecond. He analyzes the situation. Undead are already dead, so normal physical damage is completely useless. To kill one, you either need to burn it under direct sunlight or purify its core with a high-tier holy weapon. The standard tactical textbook says if you do not have those, your only option is to run away immediately. But running away in front of the entire family board of directors is not exactly a viable option. Astor decides to ignore the textbook. If he wants to prove he is a Seven Wings user, he has to do the impossible. He is going to completely vaporize an immortal undead using nothing but sheer brute force magic power. He slams his foot down and channels his golden mana into a massive shockwave. The magic pressure is so intense it literally blows the dust up to the observation deck. The nobles are clinging to the bars for dear life. Zenith looks down into the thick cloud of dust. The entire chamber is covered in a massive fog of rubble and smoke. Zenith sighs, calling it a waste. He thinks the kid blew himself up or failed. Suddenly, a massive blue claw cuts through the smoke. The undead lion is still moving, and it swipes Astor directly across the chamber. Astor crashes hard into the stone wall. The beast leaps forward to finish him off. Highfried screams his name. Highfried reaches for his sword to jump in, but Count Maze grabs his arm and tells him to wait. Maze is smiling again. He tells Highfried to calm down and look closely. Our guy is pinned against the wall, but he is literally smirking like a psychopath. Astor looks at the beast and notices its body is actually slimmer than before. The massive blast did damage its core's regeneration capacity. He grips Graham. The red and gold Seven Wings magic starts swirling around the hilt like a mini hurricane. He screams as the magic erupts from his body. He creates a blinding red-hot whirlwind of magical sword strikes. Highfried is watching in absolute shock. He recognizes the basic stance as a move he taught Astor once, but the speed, the power, and the sheer volume of magic are something else entirely. The entire dungeon is starting to crumble. The guards are screaming that the ceiling is about to collapse on their heads. Zenith's single red eye is wide open in absolute disbelief. Standing in the middle of a massive red storm of pure destruction is a 10-year-old kid, proving exactly why the Seven Wings are the ultimate cheat code. The dust finally starts to settle in the collapsed chamber. Our fat noble friend is currently flat on his back, coughing up plaster and wondering if the ceiling is about to crush him. Zenith looks down at the massive crater and realizes that Astor did not even use a real, refined sword technique. He just let loose such a massive tidal wave of raw, unrefined magical force that the immortal undead was literally ground into dust. Zenith glares at Highfried, asking if this absolute display of power was part of his training program, but Highfried just keeps his cool and says he is just as surprised by his son's growth. Count Maze steps in with his signature smug grin, asking Zenith if this means the kid officially passed the survival test. Zenith takes a long look at the destruction, sighs, and admits that nobody in the room can really argue with those results. He tells the boy to get up here, but Astor is just standing in the middle of the crater, smiling, and politely asks if they can lower a rope, because the chain he came down on got vaporized in his own magical storm. Shortly after, we shift to a quiet, sunlit study where Zenith is sitting in his massive armchair, staring at Astor through his one good eye. He asks if Astor is absolutely sure about refusing to join the main house, and Astor explains very practically that he has zero interest in their toxic succession disputes. He says if a kid with the legendary Seven Wings is constantly walking around the main estate, his cousins are not going to be able to sleep at night, so he is staying with the Viscounts. Zenith smiles, calling him humble, but notes that the pure ambition in Astor's golden eyes is completely impossible to hide. He leans forward, dropping all the political pleasantries, and asks if Astor's ultimate plan is to turn his blade against House Elmheim. Astor goes quiet, but Zenith tells him to relax. He is not actually interested in digging into the kid's true motives right now. Astor is genuinely confused and asks why the Grand Elder of the family is not treating a potential rebel as an immediate threat. Zenith's expression goes cold as he explains that the main house is not a unified group either. He says Duke Roderick is becoming a little too headstrong and independent, so having Astor around as a giant, magical check on Roderick's power actually suits his interests perfectly. But he makes it very clear that if Astor ever points those fangs at Zenith himself, he will end him on the spot. Astor steps out of the office, quietly labeling the old man as a complete monster who only cares about political leverage. Highfried and Count Maze are waiting for him in the hallway, and Astor casually lets them know that the main house tried to adopt him, but he told them no. Highfried's face completely freezes in shock. He probably expected his son to take the luxury option. Count Maze sighs, calling it a massive waste of resources, and says Astor would have had a much easier life if he had just let the main house spoil him. Astor asks Maze why he went out of his way to help him back there, and Maze just laughs, claiming he only did it because he felt like messing with Kid. He puts a heavy hand on Astor's shoulder and warns him that from this exact moment, he is publicly known as the Child of the Seven Wings. He tells him to look around the hallway. Every single noble passing by is already looking at him, either thinking about how they can use a god-tier weapon for their own gain or planning how to eliminate him before he becomes an obstacle. The target on his back is about to get 10 times larger, and the political vultures are already circling. Astor narrows his eyes and asks Maze if he is planning on joining the hunt too. Maze just looks at him with this calm, empty expression. Then, he breaks the tension, proudly declaring that he is actually a director of the Knight Academy, so recruiting ridiculously talented kids is literally his job. He points out that even the fat noble is an academy director, and says he is genuinely looking forward to seeing Astor enroll in his school. Maze walks away, leaving Astor to wonder if this incredibly slippery man is actually someone he can trust. Highfried pats Astor on the shoulder and says it is finally time to head home and brag about his insane performance to his sisters. Astor smiles, but jokes that their mother might actually pass out the moment she sees his torn clothes and the minor scratches on his chest. We then cut back to the Dark Throne Room where a knight is kneeling before Duke Roderick, reporting some massive news. He states that Darius has officially died in the underground trial set by Zenith. The knight is quietly sweating, realizing Roderick does not show a single shred of grief or anger over his own son's brutal execution. Instead, Roderick calmly folds his hands and listens to the next part of the report. Highfried's adopted kid has the legendary 7 wings. The knight is stunned when Roderick shows absolutely zero surprise at the reveal. The knight warns him that a child possessing that kind of power is going to completely destroy the long-standing balance of power within the family. He asks if they should mobilize their elite forces to handle it, but Roderick coldly tells him to leave the kid alone. He says there is absolutely no need to rush, because those 7 wings are eventually going to belong to him anyway. He decides to let the boy play around and grow stronger in the meantime. He looks out the window, remembering the night he carved the crest out of Ash's chest, and smiles, saying he wants to see just how hard the little baby he allowed to escape can struggle before he takes it all back. We got ourselves a 4-year time skip, and our boy hit puberty like a truck. We are now at the entrance exam for the prestigious Drassel Knight Academy, and the applicants are whispering about a rumored monster candidate who is supposed to show up. The receptionist hands our guy an exam waiver that basically says, if you get turned into shish kebab during this test, the academy bears 0 responsibility. The officer tells him to sign, and then demands he present his wing emblem to prove he actually has enough magic capacity to be here. He looks at the paper, reading the name Astor Elmheim, and his face instantly goes pale as he realizes who is standing in front of him. Astor, who is now looking like a Gymshark-sponsored menace in a tight black shirt, looks back at the officer. He gives him a highly cocky smile and asks if his wing emblem is in a slightly inconvenient spot to show, so maybe he can just use his face as a pass instead. The grand courtyard of the academy is packed with hundreds of anxious applicants preparing for the worst. Astor is casually strolling through the crowd, completely relaxed until a loud voice calls out to him from behind. A guy with a massive sword on his back walks up, calling him a smug-looking brat. This is Vigor Smites, and he is trying to run the classic high school bully script on a literal war veteran who has regressed from the dead. Smythes gestures to the massive academy crest, proudly boasting that this venue is only meant for the absolute elite of the kingdom. Asura just blankly stares at him, says that there is no problem then, and walks right past him like he is a piece of background furniture. Smythes is completely triggered and starts screaming about how everyone here has spent years doing grueling manual labor just to get a shot at this exam. He points at Graham on Asura's hip, mocking him for carrying a tiny, child-sized sword to a real knight selection. He tells the kid to stop sightseeing and go back to his family before he gets hurt. A couple of veterans in the crowd roll their eyes, whispering that Smythes is doing his annual routine of bullying the youngest-looking rookie to make himself feel big. But then one of them looks closer at Asura and realizes he is the legendary branch house kid from the rumors. Asura's ears twitch as he hears them whisper the name Seven Wings, and right on cue, another shadow falls over him. A voice calls out, welcoming his dear cousin to the exam arena. Asura's golden eyes turn freezing cold. Grion Elmheim, the second son of the main house, steps forward with a highly punchable smirk on his face. He mockingly says that since nobody actually knows who Asura's real parents are, he is just going to take the liberty of calling him cousin anyway. Asura brings up Darius, and Grion does not even blink. He casually waves his hand, stating that a weak disgrace like Darius deserved to die, and admits he actually feels refreshed now that his annoying older brother is out of the picture. He tells Asura that he does not care if the rumors about the Seven Wings are true or not. He leans in close and whispers that Asura should not underestimate the main house, because out here on the battlefield, there is no Highfried left to protect him. The surrounding crowd is quietly panicking, realizing that the massive, bloody feud between the main house and the branch house is about to play out right in the middle of their exam. Smythes is standing there, sweating bullets as he realizes the tiny kid he was just trying to extort is actually a high-tier noble monster from the Elmheim clan. He nervously rubs his hands together, his face completely pale, and stammers out an apology. He asks if he is really talking to the legendary Elmheim heir. Asura looks at the trembling bully, his expression softening into a very polite, almost gentle smile. He tells him that just Asura is perfectly fine, completely resetting Smythes' brain with his casual behavior. The high-pitched sound of a horn cuts through the courtyard, and the chief examiner steps onto the high balcony. He screams a massive patriotic speech, shouting that they are the glorious protectors of the king. He states that the kingdom has absolutely no use for dull, blunt swords who cannot survive a real battlefield. Asura looks up at the tower, thinking that the speech is incredibly dramatic, but realizes he has finally made it back to the starting line of his past life. This is the path to becoming an elite knight, a right that was violently stripped away from him when he was branded as wingless. And the man who still sits at the absolute summit of this entire military system is his past life murderer. He stares at the imaginary shadow of Roderick, telling his father to wait right there because he is coming for his head. But to take that first step, he actually has to pass this exam. The examiner yells for the trial to begin, and the stone walls of the courtyard suddenly open up, revealing hundreds of heavy ballista ports. Massive iron-tipped spears rain down from the sky like a storm, and the candidate right next to Asura is instantly impaled. The entire courtyard erupts into pure chaos as people realize this is the infamous trial of the Arrow Tower. The rules are simple. The last examinees standing in this courtyard are the ones who pass. Spears tear through the crowd, slicing through leather armor and pinning terrified applicants to the stone floor. Everyone is screaming to run, realizing that the academy is fully willing to let them die if they are too slow to react. The veterans quickly form defensive circles, raising their shields to block the heavy iron rain. But the examiner notes that these basic tactics will quickly reach their physical limits as the arrow speed increases. He says they are not looking for group project survival, they want to see the overwhelming individual problem-solving power that only a true Wingcrest user can wield. Smythes is cowering behind a fallen pillar, screaming at Asura to move because the idiot is just standing completely still in the middle of the open field. Grion watches from a safe distance, smirking as a massive wave of iron spears heads directly toward Asura's blind spot. Asura casually reaches behind his back and grips the hilt of Graham. The applicants watch in absolute disbelief. With a single, effortless flick of his wrist, Asura releases a blinding circular red storm of magical slashes that completely pulverizes every single spear within a 10-foot radius. He looks up at the ballista towers with a predatory grin, telling them to bring everything they have. Asura continues to spin the magic-devouring hilt Graham, creating a violent, red-hot hurricane of pure force that vaporizes the incoming steel spears. The other candidates are flat on the ground, completely speechless, watching a literal 10-year-old child block a military-grade ballista barrage with zero effort. The chief examiner watches from the balcony, absolutely amazed by the sheer level of magical control required to spin a storm of mana with that much precision. The terrifying rain of iron finally stops, and the surviving applicants slowly raise their heads, coughing in the heavy smoke and wondering if they are actually still alive. The examiner looks over the courtyard, noting that a surprisingly high number of applicants managed to survive the initial meat grinder. He yells down that those still standing have officially passed the first phase, but tells them there is zero time to celebrate as they are immediately moving to the next venue. Smites is completely out of breath, complaining about how insane the instructors are, while Aster stands next to him, totally unbothered, and asks if the senior is already tired. Smites looks at him like he is a complete freak of nature, asking how he can look so relaxed after basically fighting a war. From the balcony, the examiner watches Aster walk away, noting that the kid released a monstrous amount of magic power and is not even breathing heavily. Meanwhile, Grion is walking in the middle of the crowd, his face completely dark. He remembers a chilling warning from the main house elders telling him that he must absolutely prevent Aster from becoming a kingdom knight at all costs. The staff guides them to a weapon rack, announcing that to ensure absolute fairness in the next test, all candidates must hand over their personal heirlooms. They are all being issued standard, identical iron swords, which is a massive pain for anyone who relies on a specific weapon weight. Smites hands his massive blade over, while Astor turns in Graham and receives a cheap, mass-produced iron sword in return. He grips the simple hilt, his warrior instincts immediately flagging that something about the balance of this weapon is completely off. Grion approaches them from behind, mockingly applauding Aster for already finding himself a loyal servant to carry his bags. Smites gets defensive, but Grion cuts him off, casually noting that Smites' family is just a third-rate noble house from some backwater countryside. He warns him that backing the wrong horse in this race is going to bring his entire family a world of absolute pain, and Smites instantly folds, bowing and desperately trying to distance himself from Astor. Astor sighs, looking around at the hostile crowd and realizing that the social atmosphere is about as pleasant as a swamp. The examiner stands on a wooden platform to explain the rules of the second exam. This phase is a team-based battle royale taking place deep within the Academy's massive forest. The 20 remaining applicants are divided into 3 colored teams, and they must locate and occupy the enemy bases by planting their flags. The examiner makes it very clear that other than stealing or destroying the flags, there are absolutely no rules, meaning the issued swords are basically hunting licenses to cut down anyone in their way. He starts calling out the team colors, and Astor is handed a blue team armband. He looks around to see his teammates, realizing that Smites and a few other rookies have been placed on his squad, while Grion is leading the yellow team. A thick pillar of smoke rises over the forest canopy, signaling the official start of the Capture the Flag game. Astor starts planning their strategy, pointing out that they need to capture 2 bases to win, but he notices his teammates are just standing there, looking like they are about to cry. One of the blue teammates nervously asks if this means they actually have to fight the young master of the Elmheim main family. Astor looks at them, completely confused by their sudden lack of competitive spirit. Smites looks down, his hands trembling, and admits that they are absolutely terrified. He explains very clearly that they are not afraid of losing the exam, they are afraid of the brutal, systematic retaliation of House Elmheim. He says pointing a piece of steel at Grion means they will never be allowed to work as knights in this kingdom again. And in the absolute worst-case scenario, their entire family lines and retainers back home will be completely wiped out in some convenient accident. Smites asks Astor if he is planning on throwing his life away, saying they would rather fail today and try again next year than make an enemy of a tyrant house. He looks at Astor with a bitter smile, saying a genius from a high-ranking branch family could never understand the sheer terror of being a weakling in this world. We cut to Astor sprinting through the forest alone, realizing he is now a one-man army because his entire squad abandoned him to save their own skins. He reflects on his past life, admitting that Smites is completely right. To regular people, House Elmheim really is an untouchable monster that rules through absolute terror. He remembers Smites' sad, trembling face and realizes how deeply the main house's fear tactics have poisoned this society. He chuckles to himself, noting that from an outsider's perspective, he is probably viewed as just another piece of that tyrannical family. He reaches the courtyard of the yellow base, but the entire area is dead quiet. He slows down, his combat instincts warning him that a silent fortress usually means a very nasty trap. Suddenly, a voice calls out from above, expressing surprise that Astor actually decided to show up to the party completely alone. Christopher Nolan is leaning casually against the base wall, looking down at our guy with a cool, mocking gaze. Nolan says that things are going exactly as he predicted, leaving Astor to wonder who the hell he is talking about. Astor notices that Nolan has actually taken down his own yellow team's flag, holding it loosely in his hand like a trophy. Nolan tosses the flag aside, draws his sword, and tells Astor that since they both have some free time, they might as well keep each other company. Astor narrows his eyes, realizing this prodigy is not acting in his own self-interest. He looks up, spotting a bright red flag already flying over the yellow base wall. Meanwhile, we cut to Grion leading a massive, combined force of applicants from different teams, all wearing matching armbands. Grion smiles like a true sociopath, looking toward Astor's empty camp and declaring that he is about to show his cousin exactly how the main house plays this game. The second phase of the selection exam is turning into a massive, organized hit. Steel clashes against steel as Astor and Christopher Nolan immediately lock blades in the center of the courtyard. Basic rules of this capture the flag match require occupying 2 bases to secure a passing grade. Astor parries a lightning-fast strike and asks why a yellow team member is busy protecting a red flag. Nolan easily spins his blade, maintaining his distance, and casually explains that the explanation is incredibly simple. He reveals that he has formed an official cross-team alliance with Grion Elmheim. The examiner watches the duel from the tower, noting that Nolan is the legitimate heir of House Nolan, the legendary founders of court swordsmanship. He remembers that during the deadly spear trial, Astor and Nolan were the only 2 applicants who survived without even changing their expressions. He thinks it is an absolute shame that 2 generational talents are being forced to kill each other in the second round, because under the rules of this tactical battle, only 1 team can walk away with a passing grade. Astor pushes Nolan back, pointing out that even if they form an alliance, their teams will eventually have to turn on each other to win. Nolan smiles, stating that he already solved that problem by agreeing to let the main Elmheim house take the victory, and reveals that Grion's army is currently marching to wipe out Astor's teammates. Astor's face goes completely still as he realizes Smites and the other rookies back at the base are about to be absolutely slaughtered. He asks Nolan if Grion used the classic Elmheim threat of family massacre to force a proud prodigy like him to kneel. Nolan launches a heavy downward slash, stating that in a strictly hierarchical society, nobody intentionally stands in front of a moving carriage unless they want to get run over. But as Astor blocks the strike, a sharp cracking sound rings out, and a massive fracture appears right down the middle of his issued sword. He remembers the examiner handing him the weapon back at the rack, and realizes the entire thing was a coordinated sabotage. The main house gave him a defective blade that would shatter on impact. Nolan laughs, his blade glowing with intense yellow mana as he prepares to finish the job. He admits that he has always despised the arrogant Elmheim clan anyway, especially a flashy show-off like Astor. He unleashes a massive wind-infused strike, completely shattering Astor's broken sword into 1,000,000 iron fragments. But Astor uses the momentum to perform a flawless backflip, dodging the lethal edge by a fraction of an inch. Nolan is stunned by the kid's insane physical reflexes, realizing he managed to survive a direct, magical strike with absolutely no weapon in his hands. Astor does not waste a single second. He turns around and sprints into the forest, yelling that their duel will have to wait because he has a much more urgent problem to solve. Nolan stands there, mockingly asking if the Great Seven Wings is running away like a common coward. But as he sheathes his sword, his boot clicks against one of the broken shards of Astor's weapon. He picks up the metal fragment, inspects the terrible quality of the steel, and realized the truth. The main Elmheim house actually sabotaged their own relative sword to rig the exam. Meanwhile, Astor is running at absolute limit through the trees, screaming Smeets' name as he reaches the gates of his own camp. But as he steps into the courtyard, he finds Grion sitting smugly on top of the stone wall, surrounded by his allied troops. Grion laughs, admitting he is surprised Astor managed to escape Nolan so quickly, and says he had much higher expectations for the court swordsmanship heir. He boasts that while Astor was busy playing in the woods, his forces have successfully secured 3 separate bases. Astor glares at him, demanding to know what he did to his teammates. Suddenly, a cold piece of steel is pressed directly against Astor's back. Smites is standing behind him with a trembling sword, nervously telling him not to take this personally. He says he warned Astor from the start that he had zero intention of committing social suicide by defying the main Elmheim family. Grion laughs hysterically from the wall, mocking the country bumpkins for at least having enough survival instincts to know which master they should kneel to. He looks down at Astor with an incredibly smug smirk, declaring that the match is officially over. He explains the simple math of the situation. Grion's alliance holds all the bases, and Astor has absolutely no manpower left to mount a defense. Even if Astor somehow manages to run around the forest, they will just swap the flags back the second he leaves. The victory conditions are completely locked in, and Grion has achieved total domination. Astor lowers his head, his golden eyes glowing with a highly dangerous, freezing light. He tells his cousin very calmly that he is going to make absolutely sure they cannot swap any flags by cutting down every single person standing in this courtyard. Grion laughs his head off, calling it a pathetic bluff, and points out that Astor's weapon is completely shattered, rendering him as useless as a common wingless. He asks if a weaponless child really plans on taking on an entire army of armed knights by himself. Astor lets out a quiet, dark chuckle, his expression completely shifting into a terrifying smirk. He admits that Grion actually played a very decent political game and tosses the broken hilt of his standard sword onto the stone floor. Smites' eyes go wide with sudden, absolute terror as the shattered metal clangs against the ground. Astor slowly raises his hands, his gold eyes flaring with a massive, dark red aura of pure physical pressure. Grion's confident smile completely freezes as he feels the temperature in the courtyard drop to freezing limits. The broken pieces of iron settle in the dirt, and Astor looks up with the face of a literal demon, preparing to show this entire room why you never back a tiger into a corner. The clash of absolute ideals is about to reach its peak. Grion is still wearing that smug smile, completely convinced he won because Astor is standing there with no sword. Smites launches a desperate strike from behind, but our guy moves like a speedrunner who has memorized every frame of the boss fight. He ducks the blade, spins, and delivers a brutal sidekick straight into Smites' ribs that sends him flying across the dirt. Mid-air, Astor snatches Smites' iron sword right out of the sky. He catches the hilt and lands in a perfect low stance, pointing the stolen steel straight at his terrified cousin. He looks up at Grion, who is still standing on top of the high wall. He tells him that because the main house decided to play dirty, they are about to lose everything right now. Grion's arrogant face completely melts as he stammers out a weak insult. Astor bends his knees, channeling his golden red mana into a massive burst of physical acceleration. He leaps an impossible distance, completely defying gravity as he flies toward the top of the wall while Grion screams about how someone without wings can jump this high. He closes the distance in a split second, looking down at his terrified cousin. He slashes down, moving too fast for Grion to even think about drawing his weapon. In this brief moment of flight, Astor's mind drifts back to his childhood, remembering how he flew through the sky for the first time as a baby. The absolute feeling of omnipotence when manipulating magic power, that is what he was denied in his first life, and that is why he appreciates it now. He catches Grion by his collar, looking him dead in the eye. He tells him that the main house wall, which seemed so incredibly high, is actually pathetic. Grion is screaming for him to stop as Astor smiles with those glowing gold eyes. They crash into the stone floor below, creating a massive explosion of dust and debris that shakes the entire camp. The heavy smoke slowly drifts over the wall. Smites is coughing, clutching his bruised chest and trying to understand what kind of military-grade fighting style he just witnessed. The other applicants are staring into the dust, completely frozen in fear. Astor casually walks out of the fog, dragging Grion's limp body behind him like he is taking out the trash. His face is completely calm, his golden eyes scanning the terrified crowd. He is holding Grion by the collar like a misbehaving puppy. He drops him onto the stone floor right in front of the other applicants. Grion raises his bruised face and starts screaming at the other candidates to kill Astor, calling it an official order from House Elmheim. He is literally losing his mind, screaming that they will all pay if they do not protect him. Smites hesitates, looking at his sword on the ground, his survival instincts fighting each other. Astor looks right at him and asks if he is really that terrified of the main house's petty revenge. Smites yells back that of course they are, explaining that his family is a third-rate noble house that the Elmheims could erase with a single whisper. He says for weak commoners like them to survive, they have no choice but to act like obedient dogs, no matter how pathetic it looks. Smites is practically crying in frustration, screaming that a genius who has everything could never understand their daily struggles. Astor goes quiet, his golden eyes softening as he looks at the commoner. Then, he slowly starts to smile, which completely weirds Smites out. Astor remembers his older sister Kudo telling him the exact same thing back during their childhood training. He knows he is incredibly blessed in this life and he is not going to deny it. He says that is exactly why there is something only he can do, pointing Smites' sword right at Grion's throat. He declares that his true enemy is the entire corrupt structure of House Elmheim, and if the commoners are too scared to change it, he will do it himself. The surrounding candidates look like they just saw a ghost. Smites is sweating, asking if Astor actually comprehends the weight of what he is saying. Astor looks him dead in the eye and confirms it is an official declaration of war. He explains that no matter how much they flatter the current leaders, the only thing waiting for them at the end of their devotion is betrayal and a miserable death. He tells Smeets that if he hates living like a dog, his only real choice is to pick up a sword and fight. He says the 7 wings on his back are meant for this exact purpose and tells the crowd they need to choose right now, Grion or him. Grion screams from the floor, threatening to remember all of their names and faces, promising an absolute hell of retaliation if they betray him. Smites' face is covered in sweat as he looks back and forth between the 2 cousins. He lets out a frustrated scream. He stomps his foot onto the ground, cursing his own weakness. He runs up to Astor, asking if he is genuinely going to crush the main house, warning him that if he is lying, he will hate him forever. Smites is putting his entire life and family on the line right now. Astor looks at him with absolute sincerity and promises he will deliver on his word. Smites takes a deep breath, his resolve finally locking into place. He raises his blue armband high in the air, loudly announcing that as the eldest son of House Smites, he is officially backing Astor Elmheim. The other candidates are completely stunned that Smites actually took the gamble. Grion is seething on the stone floor, his eyes filled with pure rage as he curses the country bumpkins. Smites is still yelling at the crowd, telling them this is their chance to show up the arrogant main house bastards. He tells them to bet their entire future on the child of the 7 wings. The other candidates look at each other, murmuring as they realize they might actually have a chance to escape the main house's thumb. Astor watches them, noting that Smites is a great start, but he is going to need a lot more than one loud commoner to take down the entire empire. He looks down at Grion, who is currently trembling in defeat on the dirt floor. One of Grion's remaining lackeys runs up, nervously asking if the young master is all right. Grion slaps his hand away, screaming at them to stay away from him. He is seething with humiliation, his eyes bloodshot, thinking about how he cannot afford to fail like his dead brother Darius. He remembers Darius's severed sword on the bloody stone floor, a reminder of what happens to losers in the main house. Grion clutches his bleeding hand, swearing that his story is not going to end in a pathetic place like this. Suddenly, a pair of boots steps into the frame. Grion looks up, and a voice asks him why the high and mighty Elmheim is kneeling on the floor. Christopher Nolan is standing there, completely unbothered, looking down at his temporary business partner. Grion points his finger at him, screaming and asking where the hell he was while Astor was busy tearing through his entire army. Then, Grion's face twists into a desperate, crazy smile as he remembers Nolan is still technically on their side. Even if Nolan's crest is only a 5-wing, his physical swordsmanship is easily the sharpest in this entire courtyard. Grion orders him to hurry up and slice Astor to pieces, but Nolan suddenly grabs Grion by his collar and casually tosses him back onto the dirt. Nolan says he is officially returning Grion's stupid deal, stating that the main house's cowardly sabotage tactics completely violate his personal code of chivalry. He declares that their alliance is officially dead and buried. The other candidates are losing their minds, realizing even the legendary House Nolan has abandoned the main Elmheim heir. Nolan turns to Astor, pointing his unsheathed blade at him and stating that they still have to settle their own score to see who passes this exam. He wants to test his house's proud swordsmanship against the legendary power of the 7 wings. The 2 prodigies face each other in the open arena. Nolan charges forward, his sword glowing with a massive vortex of golden mana. Astor meets him head-on, blocking the strike with a violent red explosion of force, calmly telling him that their fight is going to have to wait. Nolan is pushed back, his hands vibrating from the sheer impact of the clash, realizing Astor's physical strength is completely different from earlier. He recovers his stance, angrily asking if Astor has forgotten that only one team can actually pass this exam. He says if they both want to become elite knights, they have no choice but to fight to the death right here. He charges again, completely focused on the win. Astor calmly closes his eyes and says that would be a massive problem for his long-term plans, telling Nolan that he wants him to become a knight too. Nolan stops in his tracks, completely bewildered by the kid's words. Astor looks around the crowd, stating that since he just hyped everyone up about fighting the main house, it would look incredibly bad if he just told them to give up their dreams. He smiles like a clever speedrunner who just found a massive glitch in the game, stating that he has a perfect plan to make everyone pass. The entire courtyard, including Grion and Smites, is completely speechless. Asura admits he cannot guarantee it, but he is extremely confident as long as everyone in this yard cooperates. He walks over to the trembling, defeated Grion. He extends his open hand, offering a very friendly, highly sarcastic peace treaty to his cousin. We cut to the main flagpole where all three colored flags, red, blue, and yellow, are tied together and raised on a single mast. The chief examiner is screaming so hard his veins are popping out, asking if they are literally illiterate and do not know how to raise a single flag. Asura steps forward and explains that the rules state a team must occupy 2 bases to win, but they never specified that only one team could occupy a base at the same time, so they formed a 3-way alliance to jointly occupy all of them. The examiner gets right in his face, furious and asking if Asura is trying to turn their glorious military selection into a joke. Smites and Grion are sweating in the background, terrified that the examiner is going to execute them all for insubordination. The examiner asks if Asura would shake hands with an enemy on a real battlefield instead of killing them, but Asura looks back calmly and asks what if that enemy has more strategic value alive than dead. The examiner yells that a knight is simply the sword of the nation and it is not their job to make political judgments. His face is completely twisted in rage. Asura asks if he is actually going to disqualify all of them, pointing out that as long as they did not break any written rules, overstepping that boundary is just the examiner's personal ego. He leans in and whispers a subtle threat, asking how the main Elmheim house would react if their precious young master Grion failed along with everyone else because of a minor technicality. The examiner's face completely crumples as he realizes he has been completely politically cornered by a teenager. An hour later, all the candidates are waiting anxiously in a large library hall. Smites is pacing around, wondering if they are all about to get executed, while Asura is casually relaxing at the table. Even Grion is sitting quietly, looking completely drained of his usual noble arrogance. Smites asks what Asura could have possibly said to make the examiner shut up like that. Asura just smirks, but before he can answer, the massive doors swing open. The examiner walks in, announcing that the academy principal, Mimir, has arrived to personally deliver the final selection results. The atmosphere in the grand library is so tense you could cut it with a dull butter knife. Every single cadet is holding their breath as the announcement begins. An elite academy official stands at the front, looking incredibly serious. He tells everyone to pay close attention because the final verdict is about to drop. Smites leans over to Asura, whispering if that is actually the legendary Principal Mimir standing right there. Smites admits the guy looks surprisingly normal for someone who is supposed to be a total powerhouse. Asura, being the sensible guy he is, just deadpans that Smites is being incredibly rude. Principal Mimir locks eyes with our guy Asura. He points out that, thanks to Asura's little stunt with the flags, the Academy board was put in a very tight spot. Welcoming this massive crowd of cadets all at once is completely unprecedented in the Academy's history. There was a heavy push from the traditionalists to order an immediate re-exam, but Mimir reveals that, with the backing of the other directors, they decided to roll with it. Asura raises an eyebrow, asking what that actually means for them. The principal's stern expression suddenly breaks, a warm, genuine smile spreading across his face. He drops the bomb. Every single one of them officially passed. The entire room goes absolutely wild. Cadets are throwing their hands up, cheering at the top of their lungs, while Grion stands in the background looking like his entire soul just left his body. Smites is practically vibrating with joy, staring at Asura with eyes full of pure admiration as the principal officially welcomes them to the academy. And just like that, the grueling, sabotaged exams are over. Under the calm night sky, our guy is officially a cadet of the prestigious Drasil Kingdom Knight Academy. Cut to the cadet bathhouse, which looks less like an academy facility and more like a 5-star luxury spa. Smites is soaking in the hot water, fully enjoying the fruits of Asura's labor. He splashes around, reminding everyone that they are currently eating delicious food and relaxing in giant hot baths solely because Asura carried them across the finish line. The other cadets, who were literally trying to jump Asura in the forest a few hours ago, are now shouting that they will follow him for life. Meanwhile, Christopher Nolan is sitting on the edge, looking highly unimpressed by these fair-weather fans. Smites immediately calls Nolan out, asking why a guy who lost to Asura is acting so high and mighty. Nolan, retaining every ounce of his noble pride, insists he did not lose. It was a strategic draw. Asura just chuckles, letting the warm water wash away the stress. He points out that despite the main house's best efforts to sabotage them, they still managed to make it in. Smites' expression gets surprisingly serious. He looks at the other commoner cadets and says that small victories like this will eventually build up into a massive tide, a tide that will completely destroy the corrupt main house of Elmheim. Astor's smile goes sharp and cold. This is exactly where their rebellion begins. As he relaxes, Astor thinks about his family. His two eldest sisters have already graduated, but his older sister Alphen is currently a student here, having enrolled a year before him. She is already familiar with the inner workings of the academy, making her a crucial ally. He notes that the actual night training begins first thing tomorrow. Astor starts walking out of the pool, dripping wet, planning to get some rest. But as he steps onto the cold stone floor, he suddenly notices a strange silence falling over the room. He turns around, utterly confused. The entire squad of naked, towel-clad cadets has crowded right behind him, staring intently at his bare back. Astor recoils, shouting to know what on earth they are doing. Smites, with a completely straight face, explains that a real-life Seven Wings crest is basically a legendary gachapole. They figure praying to his back might bring some divine RNG favor. Before Astor can even process the sheer absurdity, the entire group drops to their knees, putting their hands together in deep prayer. Astor screams that a magical brand does not work like a lucky charm. Nolan just watches this complete circus from the corner, sighing that he is already deeply worried about the chaotic future of their class. The lighthearted comedy immediately evaporates as we cut to a grand, dark palace dripping in oppressive blue moonlight. A cold, disappointed voice rings out through the empty hall. This is Helen Elmheim, the ruthless matriarch of the main house. Her eyes glow with a terrifying pink light as she looks down, utterly disgusted that Grion returned alive after letting the branch house humiliate them. Grion is trembling, completely flat on his hands and knees on the cold stone floor, looking like a discarded rag doll. He frantically begs for forgiveness, promising his mother that he will definitely make up for his blunder next time. But his apology is cut violently short as a heavy leather boot slaps directly across his face, drawing blood. Stepping out of the shadows is Lillian Elmheim. She coldly snaps that there won't be a next time for useless trash like him. Lillian stands tall, looking down on him with absolute sociopathic disgust. She sneers that worthless weaklings like him should be minced into scrap meat and fed directly to the magic beasts, just like their dead brother Darius. Grion whimpers, desperately pleading with his sister to spare him, but Lillian responds by violently grinding her high-heeled boot directly into his spine, shattering his remaining dignity. As he lies bleeding in the dark, Grion's mind fractures. The terror turns into a toxic, burning hatred. He grips the stone floor, whispering that this is all Astor's fault. Every single bit of his suffering is because of that branch house brat. A quick flashback reveals the sheer depth of Astor's strategic mind. During the exam, Astor had offered Grion a hand, proposing a deal. Astor's eyes had gone completely hollow and cold. He warned Grion that if the main house found out he got utterly outplayed by a branch house kid, the adults would execute him without a second thought. Grion had frozen in sheer terror, realizing Astor was speaking absolute, undeniable facts. Astor had leaned in, reminding him of how miserable and pathetic Darius's final moments were. We see a dark, horrific memory of Darius lying dead in a cold cell, discarded like literal garbage. That was no way for a human being to die, and Astor made sure Grion felt every bit of that chilling reality. Astor's golden eyes glowed in the dark as he delivered his ultimatum: stay quiet, overlook Astor's rebellion, and Astor would let him live. Grion had no choice but to break under the pressure. Back in the present, a deep, mocking voice echoes through the dark room, telling Lillian to go easy on her cute little brother since he's crying so beautifully. This is Julius Elmheim, the second son and a true monster. He sits lazily on a velvet sofa, smiling like a demon as he strokes the head of a kneeling girl. Julius remarks that family should always get along. He looks down at his lap, mockingly asking Alphen if she agrees with him. We get a horrific close-up of Alphen Elmheim. She is forced to the ground, her face locked in a heavy, brutal metallic muzzle that clamps her jaws shut. Her eyes are filled with tears of pure, burning rage. Helen turns to the window, staring out into the dark. She notes that the main house's absolute, terrifying dominance is beginning to waver because of Astor's 7 wings. She looks back at her psycho children, her voice dripping with cold malice. She tells them they have a very clear mission at the academy. Lillian's eyes flare with a sickening, vibrant purple light as a sadistic grin spreads across her face. Julius lets out a low, chilling laugh, his eyes glowing blood red in the dark. They are going to show the academy and the entire kingdom what true, unbridled violence actually looks like. The next morning, The courtyard of Drasil Academy is filled with the rhythmic sounds of heavy training shields slamming against the stone floor. Dozens of new cadets are already sweating, struggling to maintain their formations. An elite instructor clad in sleek white armor struts down the line, shouting that they have all been handpicked to train as the future guardians of the kingdom. But being a kingdom knight isn't just a fancy title. They are the absolute elite, expected to completely dominate every single field, from raw physical combat to high-level battlefield strategy. Smites is currently screaming, pouring every ounce of his strength into swinging his training sword against a massive dark iron pillar designed to test physical impact. But the moment his blade collides with the dense metal, the shockwave travels straight up his arms, nearly dislocating his shoulders. He grits his teeth in frustration. The thing didn't even get a scratch. The instructor explains that because of this massive skill gap, the academy divides all cadets into 6 distinct grades, tailoring the brutal curriculum to their actual proven abilities. He showcases the glowing emblems of Grade 2 and the legendary Grade 1, representing the absolute pinnacle of student power. The higher your grade, the more access you get to highly advanced classified combat techniques. Grion is seen in the background, desperately swinging his sword, looking completely exhausted. Grion's face is twisted in a mix of pain and insecurity as we see Nolan executing a flawless, wind-infused strike next to him. Nolan looks entirely calm, his icy blue eyes completely focused as his sword moves with perfect, effortless precision. The instructor's voice booms across the field, declaring that a knight who only swings a sword is third-rate, one who only uses magic is second-rate, and only those who master both are worthy of being called first-rate. He shouts that the academy has absolutely zero time to waste on mediocre trash. If they want to survive, they must continuously prove their strength. And right on cue, a colossal, blinding flash of golden-red magical energy erupts from the center of the training field, splitting the air with a deafening roar. The instructor and Smites freeze mid-sentence, their jaws dropping so low they might actually hit the dirt. Standing calmly amidst the swirling smoke is our guy Astor. He casually rests his practice sword on his shoulder, looking completely bored. Behind him, the massive, theoretically indestructible magic iron pillar has been cut completely in half, the top section slowly sliding off with a perfectly smooth, glassy edge. The instructor desperately tries to regain his composure, sweating profusely as he tells the class to aim for Astor's level. The surrounding cadets just stare in horror, shouting that this is literally impossible. Up on the balcony, Principal Mimir and a senior advisor are watching the display. The advisor asks if that is indeed the fabled 7 wings, utterly stunned by the kid's raw talent. He marvels at how effortlessly Astor sliced through a magical pillar that possesses the exact same defensive durability as a high-tier golem. Mimir looks on with a deeply serious expression. He notes that while Astor is a genius, the true terrifying potential of the 7 wings is far greater and far more dangerous. Mimir warns that if Astor gets complacent with his current strength, he will be instantly hunted down and devoured by the dragon currently nesting within the senior ranks of this academy. Later that afternoon, Astor and Smites are walking down the high stone corridors, looking out over the grand courtyard. Smites is staring at his student ID card, groaning that even after surviving the deadly exams, they are still getting sorted and tested like livestock. Smites points out that out of their entire rookie class, the only 2 cadets who didn't get immediately thrown into the lowest rank of Grade the Eye are Astor and Nolan. He holds up his depressing Grade 6 card right next to Astor's sleek, silver Grade 2 card, sighing that the commoners have already been left in the dust. Astor just flashes a warm, encouraging smile. He points out that you can't even graduate without reaching Grade 2, so Smites and the boys better start grinding so they can catch up. Smites dramatically sighs, complaining that their new boss is incredibly strict. Astor suddenly stops in his tracks, blinking in utter confusion. Astor's face goes completely blank as he repeats the word boss, with a bunch of floating question marks around his head. Smites looks offended, asking if Astor seriously forgot the epic revolutionary speech he made back in the forest. We see a quick memory of Astor standing over them with his sword, declaring that he would completely crush House Elmheim. Smites explains that quite a few cadets took those words to heart. They didn't just see a powerful noble, they saw a savior who could actually change their miserable lives. Smites looks at him with fierce, unwavering loyalty. He wraps his arm around Astor's shoulder, cheering that they are going to back him up and tear down the corrupt main house of Elmheim together. Astor's eyes soften for a split second before a sharp, incredibly wicked grin spreads across his face. He agrees they are going to absolutely demolish them, and to do that, he needs to get much, much stronger. But before any epic world-ending rebellion can take place, Astor's stomach lets out a massive, highly undignified growl. He admits they desperately need to get some lunch first. They head toward the grand dining hall, but as they approach, they find a massive crowd of cadets standing outside the doors, whispering in sheer panic. Astor pushes through the crowd, asking what's going on. The moment the cadets see him, they gasp, shouting that things are incredibly bad because the Elmheims have arrived. From inside the dining hall, a smug, incredibly punchable voice calls out Astor's name, mocking him for taking so long to show up to his own welcome party. Sitting arrogantly in the center of the hall is Julius Elmheim, with Lillian lounging right next to him. Julius has his heavy boot planted directly on top of a cadet's head, crushing him into the floor. Smeets' eyes go wide as he asks if that psychopath is actually Astor's main house brother. Astor's face goes completely dark as he confirms it. These are the infamous Tyrant siblings of the Elmheim main family, Julius, the second in line to succession, and his equally unhinged younger sister, Lillian. In his past life, Astor knew them as absolute monsters who ruled through raw, sadistic terror, leaving a trail of broken bodies and burning ruins wherever they went. Astor grits his teeth, cursing silently. In his rush to train, he temporarily forgot that these two absolute psychos were senior cadets at this academy. Lillian looks down at the cadet under Julius's boot, mockingly cooing that he has such a cute, pretty face compared to their useless, ugly younger brother Grion. We see the cadet on the floor let out a muffled, agonizing whimper. It is Grion, and his face is completely locked inside a heavy, brutal, metallic muzzle. Smites recoils in disgust, asking what that horrific mask is. Astor's voice is shaking with a mix of disgust and dark memory as he explains that those are the iron shackles. It is a barbaric disciplinary device the main house uses to physically and mentally break anyone they deem a dropout or a failure. Julius sneers, grinding his boot harder into Grion's face, laughing that even though Grion carries their legendary name, he still ended up as a pathetic grade 6 dropout in today's sorting. He grins like an absolute demon, claiming that this heavy iron muzzle is actually a loving present from a caring older brother. Julius calmly explains the sick, twisted psychology of the mask. If you turn basic human needs like food, water, and fresh air into a reward that only he can grant, even the most stubborn rebel will quickly learn to crawl and beg like a dog. Behind Julius, a long, horrifying line of senior cadets are standing perfectly still in the shadows. Every single one of them is wearing the exact same metallic muzzle, their eyes completely hollow. Smites is trembling, utterly horrified as he realizes that dozens of students in this academy have been completely subjugated and broken by this system. Julius chuckles, pointing out that their seniors all have the beautiful, starving eyes of wild beasts. He tells the rookies to make sure they greet their upperclassmen properly. Julius then turns toward the heavy curtains in the back, calling out to someone else. He tells them not to be shy and to come show their beloved little brother their new face. A rhythmic tapping of footsteps echoes through the silent hall. Astor's golden eyes dilate in pure, instinctual panic as a terrible realization hits him. Julius laughs, asking if Astor thinks his dear sister has changed for the better. The curtains part, and stepping into the light is Alphen Elmheim, her beautiful pink hair flowing, but her face is completely locked inside the cold, heavy iron muzzle. Alphen looks at Astor, a single tear of pure shame and agony rolling down her cheek as she trembles in silence. A thick, suffocating wave of pure, unbridled rage fills the room. Astor's face is completely shadowed, his teeth grinding so hard they might shatter. His hand drops to his waist, his fingers wrapping around the golden hilt of Graham with a grip tight enough to crush stone. In an absolute explosive burst of golden red mana, Astor draws Graham, the sheer force of his anger shaking the entire dining hall as he screams Julius's name, demanding to know what he did to his sister. Julius doesn't even flinch. He just sits there, looking incredibly smug as he holds a spare metallic muzzle in his hand. He casually tosses the heavy iron mask onto the floor, where it clatters loudly right next to Grion's bleeding head. Astor stands at the front of his terrified classmates, his glowing magical blade crackling with pure lethal energy as he prepares to paint the walls red. Julius spreads his arms wide, surrounded by a pile of empty iron muzzles, laughing like a maniac as he welcomes the rookies to the real academy experience. So, Julius has officially lost his mind. He orders his elite squad of senior cadets to forcefully slap the compliance masks on all the rookies, calling it their official welcome party. The seniors lunged forward, their training blades glowing with red mana. Smites is instantly backed into a corner, struggling to block a heavy downward strike. He shouts that these seniors have completely glazed over eyes, looking more like mindless zombies than actual knights. Nolan steps in, narrowly parrying a slash that nearly takes his ear off. He remarks that despite being brainwashed, their combat capability is the real deal. Smites is desperately trying to survive, noting that these guys are easily 4th grade seniors or higher. The gap in raw power is simply too wide for a bunch of fresh rookies to handle. He screams out to Astor, asking what their next move is. Astor doesn't answer. He just stands there, a massive, glowing red broadsword of pure mana materializing from Graham's hilt as 2 seniors jump him from the air. He swings once, knocking them both flat onto the stone floor before they can even register his movement. His golden eyes flare with an intense, freezing pressure. Smites looks over, completely stunned by the sheer weight of the aura our guy is radiating. Astor stares directly at his cousin, asking Julius what kind of cheap stunt he is trying to pull. Julius just smiles, spreading his hands wide like a theater actor. He tells Astor to relax, claiming this is simply his friendly way of showing some main house hospitality. He trash talks the rookies, calling them a bunch of talentless underlings who only pass the exams by picking up Astor's scraps. Lillian giggles from her seat on the dining table as Julius notes that when the quality of the incoming cadets is this low, it ruins the reputation of the entire academy. Julius holds up an empty steel muzzle, grinning like an absolute maniac. He declares he is going to solve their quality control problem the traditional Elmheim way. Astor's voice drops to a freezing whisper, telling Julius that he didn't ask for a speech. He tightens his grip on Graham, the red mana swirling around his fist like a miniature storm. He tells Julius to shut his mouth and take that vulgar metal mask off of his sister right now. Astor lunges, but his strike is blocked with a heavy metallic ring. Alphen has stepped directly between them, her cheap training sword holding back Astor's glowing red blade. She stares at him with cold, vacant green eyes behind her steel muzzle. Julius laughs from behind her, mocking Astor and claiming his sister is standing there of her own free will. He smugly tells Astor to ask her directly if he thinks it is a lie, while Lillian covers her mouth, laughing at how cruel her brother is. Astor remembers how his adoptive mother was worried about not hearing from Alphen lately. He is pushed back by Alphen's sudden, aggressive counterslash. He blocks her strikes, pleading with her to wake up. He tells her she doesn't have to listen to these main house monsters anymore, promising to save her. But his words are cut short by another rapid sword strike. Alphen forces him back with a heavy swing. Astor recoils, completely bewildered by her empty, aggressive movements. Suddenly, an angry voice screams behind him, asking why he is hesitating. Nolan charges past him, his golden mana flaring brightly. He tells Astor that if he doesn't have the stomach to strike down a brainwashed ally, then he will handle Julius himself. Julius doesn't even stand up, casually remarking that Nolan has even less class than his younger brother. Nolan unleashes his signature golden sword style, launching a rapid thrusting attack straight at Julius's chest, promising to carve the pride of House Nolan into his skin. But Julius doesn't even draw his main weapon, casually holding up a small dagger to block the heavy golden blade. He asks Nolan if he honestly thinks studying a sword like a good little student makes someone a true knight. His eyes glow a deep, predatory red as he tells Nolan he is completely wrong. A massive, roaring column of orange-red fire erupts from his body. Nolan's golden mana is instantly vaporized by the intense heat, his eyes widening in pure shock as the flames engulf him. Julius laughs psychotically, declaring that in this world, the strongest person is the only one who gets to dictate the rules. He kicks the charred, smoking body of Nolan across the dining hall. Smite screams, desperately rushing over to catch his falling classmate. Nolan lies on the stone floor, covered in severe burns. Julius steps down, sneering that he loves breaking arrogant nobles who think their pride actually means something in a real fight. Lillian walks over, swinging an empty muzzle in her hand, giggling that she is going to make an exception and keep Nolan as her personal pet. She looks at Smites, casually adding that she has absolutely no use for the ugly commoner next to him. Julius turns back to Astor, claiming that being weak is the ultimate sin, and talking back is a privilege reserved solely for those with actual power. Astor keeps his head low, his dark hair shadowing his face as the screams of the junior cadets fill the ruined dining hall. He watches a senior forcefully clamp a metallic muzzle onto a screaming rookie, completely crushing his spirit. Julius conjures 2 massive fireballs in his hands, standing proudly in front of the submissive Alphen, mockingly asking Astor which path he plans to choose for his future. Our guy has officially heard enough of this monologue. He rushes forward, his blade glowing with an explosive crimson mana. He slashes, but Julius blocks the strike with his flaming sword. A smug grin plastered across his face as the impact blows the surrounding tables to splinters. Astor's golden eyes glow with an intense burning rage as he pours more raw power into Graham. Julius's fire flares violently, threatening to consume Smites and the injured Nolan in the background. Julius sighs, asking if this mediocre display is really all the legendary power of the Seven Wings can muster, calling Astor a complete disappointment. Astor just glares at him through the flames, coldly telling his cousin that just because he managed to block a single attack, he shouldn't get so incredibly full of himself. Suddenly, Astor begins to spin, creating a violent, crushing whirlwind of red mana that throws Julius's fire out of control. Julius's smug expression instantly vanishes as he realizes Astor is actually drawing in and absorbing his own fire magic to fuel his counterattack. Astor leaps high into the air, channeling the absorbed flames into a massive downward strike that splits the stone floor with a massive explosion. He lands perfectly, the smoke clearing to reveal Julius crashed through a heavy wooden table. Astor casually remarks that he wasn't really listening to whatever Julius was blabbing about. He slowly walks toward the wreckage, Julius lying dazed on the floor while Lillian watches in absolute wide-eyed shock. Astor stands over his cousin, his face shadowed by a cold, terrifying aura. He looks down at Julius with glowing, murderous golden red eyes, telling him that small fry should really learn to stay quiet. Smites is staring at the ruined dining hall with wide eyes, completely amazed that Astor actually managed to blow the Academy's top senior through a dining table. But Julius slowly pushes himself up from the broken wood, coughing slightly. He groans that the attack actually hurt, complaining that Astor sent him flying far too flashily. He pops his neck, letting out a psychotic laugh as he touches his chest, asking what Astor is going to do if he scratches his precious main house wing crest. Smites' heart sinks as he notices Julius is still completely full of energy, despite taking a direct magic-infused hit. Lillian suddenly bursts out laughing, pointing her finger at her brother. She mocks him relentlessly, calling him incredibly lame for hyping himself up so much, only to get thrown through a table by a branch house rookie. Julius just sighs, telling her not to hurt his feelings. He draws his sword with a sharp, metallic ring, his playful demeanor instantly vanishing. His eyes burn with a terrifying crimson fire as he screams Astor's name, his raw mana flaring so violently it burns the stone floor beneath him. Astor stands perfectly still in his own dark red mana current, coldly noting that Julius made a huge mess just to play a cheap game of house. Julius lunges with a massive fire-infused downward slash, asking if Astor is truly prepared to die. Astor parries the blow effortlessly, telling him to stop beating around the bush. He tells Julius to just bring it on, the two blades locking as the intense heat begins to crack the ceiling. Astor prepares to shift his weight, aiming a lethal counterstrike directly at Julius's throat. But before either blade can land, a heavy, polished leather boot slams down directly between their weapons. A dense, purple magical barrier instantly separates the two cousins, extinguishing the fire. Stepping into the center of the room is Count Maze. He sighs dramatically, asking if they seriously forgot what a dining hall is actually meant for. His elite assistant stands behind him, her hand on her hilt. Smites and the other cadets finally catch their breath as Maze steps in to stop the madness. Julius glares at the director, telling Maze to back off. He snarls that a dining hall is no place for a retired old man who operates as a mere lackey for the main family's grand elder. Maze just chuckles, waving his hand off casually. He notes that for a first-grade senior who is supposedly the top cadet at Drazel, showing his full power to crush a bunch of weak rookies doesn't exactly look good to the public. He steps right in front of Astor, a playful, unreadable smile on his face as he politely asks them both to sheathe their swords for the day. Julius glares at the director, his burning red eyes filled with silent, calculative fury. With a cold humph, he clicks his sword back into its sheath, muttering that Maz completely ruined the fun mood of the welcome party. He turns on his heel, calling out to his squad that the welcome party is officially over, ordering them to withdraw. Astor immediately tries to push past Maze to stop them, shouting that they aren't finished talking, but Maze tightly grips his shoulder, holding him back. Maze smiles warmly, whispering to Astor that he needs him to save his face as a director and cooperate just this once. Astor is forced to stand there, watching in silence as the seniors line up. Alphen walks past him, her head bowed as she follows Julius like a lifeless puppet. He calls out her name, his voice filled with raw desperation. Alphen pauses for a single millisecond, looking back over her shoulder. Her blue eyes are completely hollow, showing zero recognition of her own brother behind the cold steel muzzle. She turns away, completely unresponsive to his voice. Her boots click against the stone floor as she steps past an empty metal muzzle left in the dirt. Asura stands alone in the middle of the ruined dining hall, his golden eyes fixed on the cold steel mask lying at his feet. We cut to the director's private office. Smites is pacing back and forth, slamming his fist on the table, calling Julius an absolute unhinged monster. He notes that Nolan is currently in the infirmary wrapped in bandages, and several of their classmates were forcefully muzzled and dragged off to Julius's personal training barracks. Smites turns to Asura, asking what their next move is. Asura just stares at the metallic muzzle in his hand, coldly telling Maze that he shouldn't have stopped him back there. Maz's assistant immediately snaps, telling Asura to show some respect to the Count who literally saved his life. But Maze just laughs, waving her off, saying this is just how he and Asura communicate. He looks at Asura with a warm, highly curious smile, asking if that is correct. Asura stares back, his mind wandering to the day he was summoned to the main Elmheim house 4 years ago. Maze was the only high-ranking noble in that terrifying room who stood up for him. Asura notes that despite that, he still can't tell if this eccentric man is a genuine ally or a highly dangerous enemy. He is a complete wildcard, and nobody in the kingdom truly knows what is going on behind those smiling blue eyes. Smite steps forward, asking Maz if he is seriously going to let this slide despite being an official director of the academy. He asks if it is truly okay for the school administration to turn a blind eye to such horrific tyranny just because the culprit is an Elmheim heir. Maze chuckles, pointing out that he is also a high-ranking Elmheim executive. Unless it causes a massive political scandal, he has no reason to interfere with the inner workings of the main house. Asura lifts the heavy steel mask, his golden eyes flashing with a sharp, dangerous light as he asks Maz if brainwashing and enslaving students to control them doesn't count as a serious problem. Maz explains, very patiently, that Dronzer is a merit-based training facility designed to produce lethal soldiers. He notes that whatever teaching method produces the fastest results is technically acceptable. He drops a massive lore bomb. The cadets under Julius's command actually rise in rank and grade significantly faster than any other class. Because of this terrifying efficiency, even Principal Mimir has officially approved of the muzzle system. Asura's eyes go dark. He realizes the system is entirely rigged. They cannot count on a single adult in this academy to help them. Maze warns Asura, telling him he better not be planning to launch a brainless frontal assault on Julius's barracks to rescue his friends. Maze's expression goes cold as he looks at Asura, warning him that his every move is being closely monitored by the main house. If he makes even a single wrong move or resists poorly, Helen Elmheim will use her absolute authority to have him immediately expelled and stripped of his knight status. Asura doesn't even flinch. He flatly states that the threat of expulsion is still no reason to abandon his friends. He looks down at the steel muzzle, his voice dropping to a low, analytical tone. He notes that this isn't about some naive sense of justice. It is because those iron shackles literally rot a person's soul from the inside out. We see a heavy conceptual panel of a cadet crying in absolute despair. Asura explains that when you are completely robbed of your freedom, your words, and your basic human dignity, something inside you breaks. Before you even realize it, your entire will to resist is completely erased, transforming you into a convenient, mindless tool for your owner. That psychological destruction is the true terror of the shackles. Maze's smile fades, replaced by a look of deep, calculating curiosity. He remarks that Asura speaks with the absolute certainty of someone who has witnessed that exact psychological destruction firsthand. Asura let out a low, bitter chuckle. In his first life as Ash, he was treated as a mindless, disposable tool by his father, eventually having his very soul ripped out of his chest. He knows the fate of a broken tool better than anyone in this room. He looks at Smites, stating simply that he refuses to let his friends end up like that. Maze stares at the young boy, his mind racing. He realizes there is something incredibly ancient and deeply terrifying hidden beneath Asura's 14-year-old exterior. Asura turns toward the door, telling Maze not to worry, claiming he has absolutely no intention of getting himself expelled over a clumsy rescue mission. He admits settling things peacefully within the academy rules is the best path. Maze raises an eyebrow, highly amused, asking if the kid actually has a realistic plan to bypass the system. Asura holds up the heavy steel muzzle, a cold, highly confident smile spreading across his face. He tells Maze that he is about to show the entire academy his personal, highly effective way of fighting. 3 days have passed since our guy decided to pull the most unhinged leverage play in academic history. We open on the training grounds, where the junior cadets are running laps, looking like they are about to see God. Smites runs up to Nolan, who is literally wrapped in medical gauze like a budget mummy, asking if he is seriously fine to be running after getting roasted by Julius. Nolan just huffs, stating the 4th grade training is starting and he has no time to rest. He claims his near-fatal 3rd-degree burns were just a minor scratch. Smites looks at him, completely exhausted, thinking this guy's pride is actually terminal. Smites looks ahead, noting that while Nolan's stubbornness is bad, the real person they should be worried about is currently leading the pack. Yes, that is our guy Astor, casually speedrunning laps while wearing the heavy steel compliance muzzle. We get a quick flashback to 3 days ago. Julius was lounging in his private room, mockingly telling Astor he had some serious nerve showing his face again. He was sipping expensive wine, surrounded by his army of brainwashed seniors, asking what kind of pathetic deal a branch house brat could possibly offer him. Julius's eyes flared red with pure, concentrated main house arrogance as he barked, demanding to know who Astor thought he was dealing with. Astor didn't even blink, his golden eyes perfectly calm. He pointed to the empty muzzle on the table, stating he was here to get his sister Alfin and his classmates back. He casually slid the steel shackles toward his cousin, offering to put the mask on his own face in exchange for their freedom. That was his only condition. Alfin's eyes widened in absolute horror behind her steel mask, her mind racing as she wondered what kind of suicidal madness her little brother was planning. Julius's anger instantly turned into a smug, highly satisfied grin. He admitted that putting a literal leash on the kingdom's most dangerous rebel was an incredibly good deal for the main house. Lillian burst out laughing from the side, asking if Astor was actually insane, mockingly wondering if he genuinely wanted to be kept as her personal pet. Julius took a slow sip, calling Astor a massive masochist. He noted that to House Elmheim, Astor was a highly annoying thorn in their side. His gaze went razor-sharp as he admitted the elders would be absolutely delighted to see him muzzled. But he knew Astor wasn't the type to just obediently lie down and take an L. He leaned in, trying to read Astor's expression, demanding to know what kind of secret scheme he was running behind those quiet golden eyes. Astor just deadpanned that he was planning nothing. He pointed out the basic mechanics. The shackles are locked by Julius's own magic power, meaning Julius could literally execute him with a single command. Then he let out a highly provocative, slightly sinister smirk, asking Julius if he truly had so little confidence in his own ability to tame him. That absolute masterclass of psychological bait worked perfectly. Julius's pride snapped, his wine bottle instantly catching fire as he snarled that he would gladly take him up on that bet. He crushed the burning bottle, stating that a simple trade would be far too soft for a rebel. Julius offered a new diabolical set of rules. Astor must endure 10 full days without a single drop of food or water while wearing the shackles. If he manages to stay alive, Julius will release everyone. Alfin let out a muffled, desperate scream, begging Astor to refuse because surviving 10 days of total starvation while performing brutal night training is biologically impossible. She screamed that he was going to die, but Astor just nodded, accepting the deal. The heavy steel muzzle slammed shut over his face, drawing a splash of fresh blood as his inner voice noted that the shackles don't just lock your mouth, they slowly rot your mind. He looked at Alfin's trembling figure. He remembered her from their childhood as a fierce, highly competitive older sister who always put on a brave face to protect him. She was a strong, proud sibling who would rather die than show a single trace of weakness to her enemies. But under Julius's torture, her spirit had been so thoroughly crushed she couldn't even stand straight, looking at her younger brother with eyes full of vacant terror. As Lillian wrapped her hands around his neck, whispering that they were going to have a wonderful time together, Astor silently vowed to tear those shackles to pieces. Back in the present, a brutal senior instructor is screaming at the muzzled cadets, kicking them into the dirt for daring to rest during their physical conditioning. Grion is face down in the mud, crying under his mask, cursing his pathetic life and wondering why he has to go through this absolute hell. Smites runs past, noting that the Academy's demon instructors show zero mercy to the muzzled students. He whispers that at this rate, half of them will be dead before Astor's 10 days are even up. Smites looks over at Astor, completely baffled. Even though several days of total starvation have passed, our guy is still running at the front of the pack, completely unfazed. He wonders if having the Seven Wings brand means Astor's stamina is just built different. Nolan watches him silently, analyzing the grim biology of the situation. He notes that a normal human can only survive 3 or 4 days without water, and a week at the absolute limits of human endurance, and that is only if they remain completely still. But Astor is currently performing high-intensity combat drills, lifting heavy logs through freezing rivers, and running miles daily. By all laws of science, his body should have collapsed days ago. Nolan looks at Smites, bringing up the legendary rumor about Astor's infancy. He mentions the story of baby Astor crawling alone through a freezing, lethal blizzard over a snowy mountain for several kilometers before getting adopted. Smites' eyes widen as he realizes the kid's life force is literally not human. Nolan tries to act cool, claiming the story is probably just a boring bluff, but he can't ignore the red steam of raw, burning mana radiating from Astor's body as he sprints past. Cut to the dark, damp barracks at night. The muzzled cadets are slumped against the cold stone walls, looking like literal corpses. The heavy doors swing open as Lillian struts in with a sadistic smile, flanked by guards carrying silver trays, loudly announcing feeding time for the sewer rats. She snaps her fingers, her purple magic flaring. The guards drop a tiny, rock-hard piece of stale cheese and a single glass of water onto a plate. This is the entire reward for a full day of brutal physical labor. A muzzled senior cadet stares at the plate, whimpering in absolute despair, realizing his body has finally reached its breaking point. Grion falls to his knees before his sister, weeping and begging her to have mercy and give him some actual food before he starves to death. Lillian responds by violently stomping her heavy boot directly onto his plate, crushing the cheese and water into a disgusting paste. She kicks him away, telling him he shouldn't be so wasteful. She sneers that unlike them, there are children in the slums suffering much worse, while Astor sits silently in the dark corner of the room, completely ignoring her. Up on the balcony, Julius is lounging on a velvet couch, slicing into a thick, juicy, medium-rare steak. He looks down at Astor, mockingly calling him incredibly brave. He turns to Alfin, who is forced to stand next to his table, asking why she doesn't go down and cheer her heroic little brother up. Julius bursts into a loud, psychopathic laugh, eating a piece of meat. He sneers that she probably doesn't have the face to look him in the eye, since Astor is currently starving to death solely because of her weakness. Alfin stands there, her body shaking with pure, suffocating guilt, staring down at her own plate of soup as she silently weeps for her brother. Julius's smile fades slightly as he cuts another piece of steak. He admits he expected Astor to have some sort of secret escape plan, but the kid is literally just sitting there, offering zero resistance. He sticks his fork into the meat, wondering if the branch house brat is genuinely stupid enough to think he can survive 10 days of this. His sadistic grin returns as he decides it doesn't matter. He is going to thoroughly enjoy watching Astor's slow, agonizing decline. Meanwhile, our guy looks up through the dark, his golden eyes glowing like a predator waiting in the shadows. His posture remains perfectly steady, showing zero signs of a breaking spirit as the night fades. The next morning, we get a quick, card-like tutorial on the advanced mechanics of this world's magic system. If you channel mana into a sword, it becomes incredibly sharp. If you wrap it around your flesh, it becomes a dense, invisible armor. To put it simply, mana is the ultimate utility tool, changing its properties entirely based on the user's will. An instructor demonstrates this by sending 2 cadets sprinting across the field at speeds that could easily outrun a racehorse. He explains that mana can act as eyes to detect hidden threats. Suddenly, 2 senior cadets launch a surprise ambush from Astor's blind spot, screaming that he is wide open. But before their fists can land, a massive, violent hurricane of red and gold mana erupts from Astor's body, tearing up the surrounding grass. The seniors are instantly thrown back by the sheer force of the wind, their eyes widening in shock. As the dust settles, they look around, completely bewildered to find the center of the crater empty. Astor has completely vanished from their sight. A massive vertical beam of red energy strikes down from the canopy like a lightning bolt. Astor drops from the sky, slamming both seniors face first into the dirt, knocking them out cold in a single motion. The instructor continues his lecture, stating that in 4th grade training, cadets must master this specialized, swordless mana manipulation. He reminds them that drawing a weapon during these drills is strictly forbidden. A seagull flies overhead. With a casual flick of his finger, the instructor shoots a tiny, laser-thin beam of yellow mana straight through the bird's chest. As the dead bird tumbles to the ground, the instructor smiles evilly, pointing out that for those who possess a high-tier wing brand, a sword is entirely optional when it comes to taking a life. He tells the class he expects them to master this lethal efficiency. Astor stands in the background, a faint red mist evaporating from his hands as he looks down at the defeated seniors. We transition to day 7 of the starvation challenge. Astor is sitting alone in the deep forest, his chest heaving as he tries to regulate his breathing. His internal monologue notes that while he is getting used to the swordless mana manipulation, his body is rapidly approaching its biological limits. He only has 3 days left to survive. He tells himself that if he can just hold out for 72 more hours, Alphen and the others will finally be freed from Julius's grip. But he quickly shakes his head, realizing he is being far too passive. He remembers the sheer destructive firepower Julius displayed during their brief clash. Julius is a first-grade senior who hasn't even shown a fraction of his true limits, and he did all of that without even drawing his main sword. Astor forces his trembling legs to stand. He knows that if he just tries to endure and survive, he will lose. He needs to grasp a new level of power during this extreme training, something that will let him bridge the gap between their grades. Suddenly, a severe wave of vertigo hits him, the forest canopy blurring into a chaotic mess of colors. His vision spins violently as he collapses onto his hands and knees, his body temperature rising rapidly. He falls flat into the dirt, coughing, realizing his physical body has finally hit its absolute limit. A pair of pristine leather boots stops directly in front of his face. A hand gently touches his forehead, noting that he is running an incredibly high fever. Nolan is kneeling next to him. He sighs, stating that at the end of the day, even a Seven Wings user is still human. He reveals that Count Maze pulled him aside, ordering him to keep Astor alive if things went south. He mutters that he has been dragged into a highly annoying chore. Nolan stands up, telling Astor to stay put while he runs to get his sword to break the magic muzzle off his face. But Astor quickly reaches out, firmly grabbing Nolan's ankle. Nolan looks down, shocked, telling Astor he is going to die if he keeps playing this stubborn game. Astor looks up, his golden eyes burning through his fever as fresh blood leaks from his muzzle. He warns Nolan not to do anything unnecessary, stating that if he breaks the rules of the bet now, Alphen will never be freed. Nolan sighs, grumbling that he can barely understand his muffled, blood-choked words, but he can clearly tell the kid is highly dissatisfied. He warns Astor that even if he keeps his promise, the main house has zero intention of playing fair. Suddenly, a high-pitched, mocking voice rings out from the canopy. Lillian leaps down from a branch, flanked by a massive squad of muzzled seniors. She giggles, warning Astor that if he wanders around looking like a walking corpse, someone might mistake him for an undead and put him down. Astor's eyes narrow as he recognizes the sadistic sister. Nolan immediately steps in front of Astor, demanding to know why she brought a small army of gloomy-looking seniors to a junior training zone. Lillian happily explains that these 4th-grade cadets wanted to show off for her, so she came for a class observation. She claims the instructor gave her full permission to watch the outdoor drills. The brainwashed seniors slowly close their circle, surrounding Nolan and the weakened Astor. Lillian swings her legs from a low branch, her pink eyes glowing with pure, unadulterated sadism. She clasps her hands together, giggling that what she wants to see most is Astor on his knees, weeping and begging for his life. She drops to the ground, telling them not to mind her. She orders her puppets to start the drill, telling them to kill each other as much as they please. Instantly, the seniors charge, their fists glowing with dense purple mana. Astor is forced to block a heavy, magic-infused punch. He realizes the main house's plan. They want to physically crush him before the 10 days are up, and now he has dragged Nolan into their trap. Nolan easily deflects a strike, cursing the school's strict no-sword rule. He notes that while the restriction is highly annoying, the real problem is the sheer difference in their numbers. Astor's mind races as he blocks another blow. He knows that exchanging standard blows in his starved, feverish state will only drain his remaining life force. He needs a low-cost, high-efficiency technique, a trump card that can turn the tide without a weapon. Lillian watches from her branch, smiling smugly as Astor is forced into a brutal brawl. She mocks his stubbornness, claiming his refusal to give up is only going to make his death much more painful. She watches with a highly satisfied expression. She mutters that his suffering is entirely his own fault for trying to play the hero against the main house. Nolan screams for Astor to dodge as a massive senior charges forward, his entire body radiating an explosive purple aura. Astor's body is too slow to react, his eyes widening as the magic-infused fist slams directly into his chest. The impact splits the air as Astor is sent flying backward, coughing up a heavy spray of blood under his steel muzzle. He crashes violently through the thick underbrush, tearing up the dirt. Nolan looks over in absolute panic, shouting to know if he is actually dead. Asura lies completely motionless in the dirt, a pool of blood forming around his head. Liliane laughs from her branch, telling the seniors to make sure they don't kill him just yet. She orders them to leave him with just a single breath of life, wanting to savor his slow demise. A massive senior walks over, violently grabbing Astor by his hair and lifting his bloody, unconscious face. Liliane commands them to beat him until his bones are dust. The senior raises his fist, his purple mana crackling with lethal force, but as the shadow of the fist falls over him, Astor's eyes suddenly snap open. His golden pupils shine like two brilliant, burning suns. A sudden, violent flash of crimson light slices through the air, spraying fresh blood across the grass. Liliane's sadistic smile instantly freezes, her eyes widening in pure, unadulterated shock as she gasps. Astor stands tall, the senior's severed hand dropping into the dirt behind him. Blood drips from his steel muzzle, but his gold eyes are burning with an absolute terrifying desire to kill as his hand flares with a massive vortex of crimson mana.